The Imperial Hall was buzzing with excitement about who would be this year's Lady of the Year. A red-haired girl with a fan in her hands, with the air of an expert, answered that of course no one. She reasoned that His Majesty would most likely appear with the Empress, and the Crown Prince had spent several years fighting monsters. And therefore, according to the girl's logical conclusion, no one will go out arm in arm with a member of the imperial family this year. But one of the girls thoughtfully said something about Duke Lucius. He is, after all, a member of the imperial family. The red-haired girl understood why the girls from the provincial academy were not in the know. She liked to appear to be well-informed about all matters, so she stated that the Duke never appeared at such events. Lucius suffered from a magical disorder that left him unable to control his powers and quick to anger, and he was a stain on the imperial family's reputation. Therefore, after the unfortunate prince was awarded the title of Duke, he was immediately kicked out, so there was no doubt that he would not appear at such an event. The girls realized how little they knew about the capital and sighed and moaned. Their chatter was interrupted by the voice of Duke Lucius Winterrose Gresvel, and a handsome young man with a refined, aristocratic face appeared in the hall. The gossips gasped, and the red-haired girl was speechless with surprise. The hall was especially silent when the Duke's companion, Lady Daphne Peregrine, was introduced. The red-haired girl, almost choking, could not believe how this was even possible. Lady Daphne looked like she stepped out of a painting, a graceful, dazzlingly beautiful girl with soft porcelain skin, ash-pink hair, and emerald eyes. The girls, forgetting about the red-haired girl, began to shout greetings to her, saying how glad they were to see her. Daphne Peregrine was the main villain of this story, namely, the novel that our heroine read. Genre: romance novel 18+. According to the plot, the goddess goes to war to drive out the devil. 4 heroes followed her. The first one was called Gresvel the Peaceful. The third hero is Evan Strong, and the last guard of the devil, Peregrine, is the ancestor of that very Daphne from the novel. It was known to everyone that members of this family, for generations, had possessed either outstanding magical abilities. Either they were superior in sword skills, with which they could instantly slay a monster, but Daphne did not have this amazing gift. In addition, her mother, Amela Peregrine, died during childbirth. The Duke, grief-stricken at the loss of his daughter, turned away from his granddaughter, and then Daphne decided to take holy orders to free herself from her troubles. In this regard, there is not a single person in the Empire who does not know Daphne. This heroine became famous for plotting against everyone, regardless of a person's status. This is how her fate unfolded in the original story, which is why she was eventually expelled from the capital. But now everything has changed for Daphne Peregrine. The Duke whispered to her whether she could see that all eyes in the room were on her. Lady Daphne replied that she knew about it, which is why she came here. The guy smiled charmingly, noticing that it seemed she was more accustomed to attention than he was. Forcing a smile, she thought to herself how the Duke had hit the nail on the head. Even though Daphne was striving for all of this, for some reason she couldn't shake the feeling of anxiety. Lucius looked closely at his companion and chuckled slightly. The girl pouted and raised her index finger and said that His Majesty was forbidden to be jealous. Although he agreed, he admitted that he didn't want anyone else to look at her except him. But Daphne asked if they weren't in a banquet hall where everyone was looking at them. Although this was an ironclad argument, Lucius still could not come to terms with it. Both men and women in the hall couldn't take their eyes off Lady Daphne. How beautiful she was. The Duke didn't like this at all. All the men were staring at Daphne. As if reading his thoughts, she cooed in her tender voice that he was her partner. And in general, if it weren't for him, she wouldn't have been able to attend this event at all. She wanted to attract this attention to herself in order to announce her return to the capital, all thanks to the Duke. And the girl thanked Lucius for this opportunity. He did not have time to answer anything as he covered his mouth with his hand in embarrassment. The girl got scared and started to fuss about what was wrong with him. Something was hurting again. Squeezing her hand, he replied no. Without taking his loving gaze off her, Lucius admitted that it was all because he was glad to take the place next to her. This had happened before, so she wasn't surprised, and in the background, they applauded her and called her an angel and a beauty. But the most important thing is that she is alive. She returned to the capital together with the Duke from the Magic Tower. Now it seemed to her that she had avoided that very ending when she was dying in prison. The orchestra began to play, and couples began to waltz. Lucius stared at his lady, as if enchanted. He gently supported her as she twirled in a waltz, and asked how she was enjoying her first imperial ball. Everything was just as she had imagined. Everything was striking in its beauty, magnificence, and grandeur. The Duke leaned over and whispered that he still hoped that in the lady's eyes, he was the most beautiful. And again he made her blush, The nervous girl muttered that they were still looking at them. The young man didn't see any problem with this. He wasn't concerned about other people's opinions. The girl smiled. Yes, he is a unique character. Of course, she was also a part of this world. A character like the Duke. But it was not always like this. In fact, she was the most ordinary girl from a big city. She was raised by a strict grandmother. Our heroine had other brothers, and her grandmother asked with displeasure if she went to university, what would happen to the twins? She reminded her that her granddaughter wasn't the best student, and therefore she wouldn't get a scholarship. Her father said that she should give up university for the sake of her younger children. Neither her father nor her stepmother were interested in her life. Swallowing her tears, our heroine cursed her life. Damn concessions! Promising herself that as soon as she got a job, she would cut off all ties with this family. Thanks to her efforts, the girl entered a good university and graduated with good grades. She also managed to land an internship at a large company. If she wins the competition at the large company, she will be hired permanently. But there, too, failure awaited her. She was accused of plagiarizing the project. The senior manager simply took away her project, saying that she should try to prove that it was her project. No matter how much she screamed asking for it to be returned, she really needed a job in this company. The truth was that no one cared. She was fired as an intern without the possibility of reinstatement. The girl bought a bottle of wine, and then her brothers started writing that today was Grandma's birthday, but she didn't come. The atmosphere at home wasn't very good, and as usual, they started begging her for money. And then she saw the blinding light of headlights. She flies back from the blow. There is severe pain, blood, and the end of life. But that was the end of that life. When she opened her eyes, she saw a dazzling room and a beautiful mirror in a gold frame. The first questions in her head were where she was. In heaven, in the hospital. But why such a luxurious setting? She felt her body. But then where was she? Whose luxurious room was this? A girl came in and addressed her, calling her mistress. Our heroine choked and coughed, and blood started coming out of her mouth. My throat was torn apart by pain. The maid ran up asking me not to talk. This couldn't be done. My stomach was twisted, and the maid was talking about some kind of poison that hadn't been removed from my body yet. The thought flashed through her head. Didn't she die under the wheels of a car? And looking in the table mirror, she saw herself with pink hair. Needing to take a closer look at herself, the girl jumped up to the mirror. It was simply incredible, this beautiful girl. Slender and graceful with long pink hair was our heroine. There was such an expression on her face that the maid was afraid that her mistress had gone crazy. The girl stared at the mirror with wide eyes. When the girl sat clutching her head, lines and illustrations flashing through her mind about how the youngest daughter of the Peregrine family died in childbirth. And if not for this child, she would have remained alive, and therefore Daphne Peregrine was called a born villain. Behind her back, they whispered that she was quite aggressive and obsessed with her fiancé. I remembered the words of a young man who categorically declared that he liked the saint, and not Daphne. Then Daphne was accused of poisoning the saint and ordered to kill the villain. From behind the bars, Daphne screamed that she was not guilty of anything. The saint seduced Roderick. Therefore, she was to blame for everything. How Daphne Peregrine didn't want to die like this, and now memories of Daphne Peregrine flashed through our heroine's head. Her temples were pounding. This was the plot from the novel she had recently read. Seducing the saint. It didn't fit in her head. It turned out she had ended up in the novel. But the most terrible thing is that in this novel, she turned out to be the main villain, who poisoned the saint out of jealousy and ended up alone. Even though her past life was shit, this one looks like it won't be any better. Someone came up and asked if she had already gotten up. The man, with a cold and cruel expression on his face, said that attempting to commit suicide was a waste of money and a shame for the family, and it seemed that she did not feel sorry for those who raised her. The newly minted Daphne tried to remember this man. It was her maternal uncle, Count Leos Peregrine. He is a public prosecutor and is also considered a prominent scholar and authority in the academy. And he also despises Daphne for causing his sister's death. The final realization came that she was now Daphne. It was scary and disturbing. Her uncle spat with anger as he scolded the girl for her disgusting behavior, and only because Prince Roderick had offended her, he called it a pathetic sight. She agreed. Why sacrifice yourself for love? It's such a fleeting feeling. While reading the book in her past life, she was not particularly aware of it. I felt very ashamed of Daphne. How she could have inhabited such a pathetic body. The man could barely contain himself and announced that this was his last act of mercy. A decision on her punishment will be made later. Daphne thought about the medicine. Her uncle declared that she would not take a single step outside the mansion until the Duke arrived. Then he turned around and walked out of the room. The girl opened the door to one of the rooms. She even started to shudder. This was Daphne's laboratory, the one she had now become. Daphne studied herbalism to become a saint, so she built her own greenhouse and began growing her own medicinal herbs. Our heroine was horrified that her character was studying herbalism. It was even worse than she imagined. If the real Daphne were standing here now, she would hardly have had the skills to prepare the medicine. But the old Daphne is no longer there. After all, she has 5 years of part-time work in an Oriental medicine clinic behind her. To pay for tuition and other expenses, she needed to work part-time. But the pensioners were pleased with the diligent student. She managed to remember all the herbs and compositions, and she was the only director who considered her a good employee. He offered her a full-time position, but our heroine declined, as she was offered a position at a pharmaceutical company. It was a great experience, and thanks to it, she understands herbs with her eyes closed. Now, she needed to find herbs that were similar to the plants from her past life. Suddenly, she heard children's voices outside the door. 2 boys ran down the corridor, one in front, teasing the other behind for being slow. The one running ahead gasped when he saw the girl come out, but it was too late. They collided, and Daphne sat on the floor rubbing her forehead. The boy also sat down on the floor, rubbing his bruised head. Daphne got angry and asked who allowed them to run along the corridors. At that moment, her brother ran up. The boy who ran into Daphne was named Julius, and his brother helped him up. The children were twins, Hermano Peregrine and Julius Peregrine. Looking at them, Daphne realized that these were the sons of Laos, who were her cousins. Laos's wife Eileen died shortly after the twins were born, and the children never experienced their father's warmth. After that, they met the main character, who gave them love for the first time, as a result of which they became her little heroes. Our heroine bowed, thinking that this life was also connected with twins. And this was justified, considering the relationship between the former Daphne and these guys. These children were worthy of the title of imps. The twins told her to look directly, calling her a witch. The girl started to boil. How dare they talk to their older sister like that? And the boy even brazenly asked again. He said something wrong. Hermano supported his brother with a trembling voice, and the boys prepared for punishment, looking into the witch's eyes. Daphne had fun watching these children as they tried to hide their fear, especially if they didn't stutter. They would look more important. These twins reminded her of her twin brothers from a past life. The girl raised her hand. The boy closed his eyes, expecting the blow. When the children opened their eyes, they didn't understand anything. Daphne's hand didn't hit them, but stroked their heads. Then the kids jumped up when Daphne suggested they have some more fun somewhere else. Julius, all red, yelled at Daphne, calling her a damn witch and why she was touching him. He grabbed his brother, who was clearly confused, and dragged him down the corridor. Daphne was amused by this. They reminded her of stubborn puppies. It looked so cute. At that moment, the frightened maids came in looking for the twins. Our heroine looked terrifying in their eyes as she pointed in the direction where Julius and Hermano were headed. She knew how hard it was to raise twins. The maids, trembling with horror, bowed and thanked. And before Daphne could even answer, they ran off at such a speed that the girl didn't even have time to lift a finger. It was completely strange to her that people were running around the corridors like that. So Daphne tried to create a cure. Having created a potion, now she had to drink it. As soon as she brought the bottle to her mouth, she felt her throat tingle. Then she resolutely drank the entire bottle. The girl froze from an incredible sensation. It was so delicious, and the pain in my throat became much less. Someone behind her started yelling, calling her baby. So Daphne almost broke the bottle. An older lady ran up, hugging Daphne, and feigned that she was very worried. Our heroine, having barely freed herself from the grip, asked the woman who she was. The woman was disappointed that they couldn't remember her. Daphne studied her, trying to remember how she said that she was her favorite mentor, Flora. Daphne was completely twisted. Could it really be that same Flora Charlatan, the former Empress Hela when she was young? Daphne's grandfather, the current Duke Peregrine, rejected her marriage proposal. She was never able to cope with the defeat. Years passed, and she still ground her teeth in anger. Then Daphne, as a villain, helped this woman infiltrate the Duke's family. It was she who, at the banquet, discovered the poison, announcing to everyone that Daphne was studying herbalism on her orders. Daphne was detained until evidence was found. Daphne screamed that it wasn't her. Flora stated that although there was no direct evidence, there was indirect evidence given Daphne's past actions. And to prevent this from happening again, she decided to appoint an observer. This viewer was the so-called angel from the church, an agent of the former empress Flora Charlatelli, who was sent to the Duke's house. Thus, Daphne became a puppet in her hands. Our heroine thought sadly that adults behave like children. How can you treat people who love you so rudely, especially your granddaughter? Flora shed a tear, groaning that Daphne was shocked that Roderick had called off the engagement. The child who had prepared so diligently to accept her was so shocked. She approached Daphne again, grabbed her hands, and declared that everything would be fine. She would help her, and if she followed her advice, then Daphne could become a saint and get her fiancé back. The woman seemed to be scanning her charge so much that she had to turn her face away. Then she said that she was very glad that Daphne's face was okay. The girl didn't understand at all what her face had to do with it. Flora said straight to her face that Daphne's reputation was long lost. Fortunately, she has a beauty that no one can compare to. She held her hands on Daphne's cheeks, saying that beauty was her main weapon, and it needed to be well prepared. Looks are what men want, and her beauty will help her win Roderick's heart. Daphne was amazed that this woman didn't even ask how she felt. She simultaneously tries to comfort her and treats her like a commodity. She kept whispering to Daphne to look at herself in the mirror. How could Roderick not love her? She always tells the truth. You just need to trust your mentor. Everything turned upside down in our heroine. She remembered how she wanted to become a full-time employee, but her project was simply stolen. Everything boiled over, and the girl rudely pushed her mentor away. She will no longer tolerate being used, she said, calling Flora grandmother, that she also needs to take care of herself. She was shocked, so she asked again, and Daphne explained her own words that men like appearance, and therefore it is worth taking care of yourself. And coquettishly adjusting her hair, she explained that she should also take care of herself, shouldn't she? Flora was shaking all over. She asked what Daphne was saying now. Our heroine said in an innocent voice, "Well, Lady Flora is not a grandmother." And blinking her eyes, she apologized. She had just woken up and the memories were mixed up in her head. She reminded her of her grandmother, who constantly gave advice not to make mistakes. And it was true. Her grandmother from her past life was constantly nagging her granddaughter to get married quickly before she withered away. Flora was clearly younger than her grandmother, but she was clearly worried about being alone. So her words definitely hurt her pride. But if this woman gets angry at her right now, it would be funny. What does she feel when Daphne, whom she didn't care about, was causing her so much pain now? Flora answered her like this, calming her trembling, and said that it seems Daphne really hasn't recovered yet. Despite her poorly concealed anger, she thanked Daphne for her concern, but our heroine folded her arms and replied in an unctuous voice that how could it be otherwise? She was her student after all. And the girl noticed that since the conversation turned to care, the store she visits gives a discount to those who come with family members. And she suggested to her so-called frowning grandmother to go together. If this happens, her thoughts will be focused on only one thing, that this insane girl considers her grandmother and invites her shopping. Turning sharply towards the standing maids, she declared that all this was nonsense and that she was not interested. The girl stood there unblinking, awaiting orders, looking piercingly at the maids. She said in a deep voice that she would take care of her and let Daphne rest. Then, with a strained smile, she emphasized that health is the most important thing. She needed to inform the Imperial Temple about her awakening, and our heroine, also with a tense smile, thanked them for their concern. She called Miss Flora such a kind adult. Flora did not recognize the girl in front of her. Why is a child who was always obedient now behaving like this? Something was clearly wrong, and Daphne needed to be watched. It was clear that Daphne had clearly won now. Daphne stuck her tongue out at her departing mentor. The battle began, and then she noticed that her throat didn't hurt at all. She wondered what she should do now, since they had spared her life, even if it was in the book world and in another body. How she should live now. If they decided that she was good at self-knowledge, then perhaps she could find shelter in a spiritual monastery. If she can live somewhere on the outskirts, then Peregrine will gradually forget about her. I wanted to find myself in a beautiful place, where there is greenery and mountains, and it is easy to breathe, where you can live perfectly well alone. She caught herself thinking that this was absolutely wonderful. Why not live this life as a villain with a golden spoon in her mouth? Meanwhile, Lucius was smoking in his office with a bored expression on his face. In the corridor, the twins called her, and the girl looked at them in surprise, asking what they needed. Hermano and Julius, holding hands, looked at her with great tension. Apparently, they were scared when they saw Daphne in the corridor, and Julius stuttered that they also had the right to walk down the corridor. How she was amused that the boys were going to the library to get a book. They rushed away from her as fast as they could. Daphne also needed to go to the library, and when she entered, her mouth fell open at what she saw, as if she were on a film set. Julius had already grabbed his brother by the hand and was dragging him towards the other end of the room. Daphne enjoyed looking through the books. She would never have thought that without the internet, it would be possible to classify so many books in alphabetical order. Taking the book, the girl sat down on the sofa. She always dreamed of reading a book next to the fireplace. Having decided to begin, she opened the book. Meanwhile, the twins did not take their eyes off her from behind the back of the chair. Daphne caught their piercing glances and, looking up, asked what they wanted to read together. Hermano just stood there, embarrassed, and Julius, like a ruffled kitten, snapped that they always sat by the fireplace too. Their eyes widened in surprise when the so-called witch invited them to sit next to her. Our heroine patted the sofa with her hand, saying that there was enough space for both of them. The boys sat down on either side of Daphne, and Julius, in his usual style, declared that since she wanted to sit with them, they would give up their seat for her. Then, seeing her face, Julius explained that they usually don't read next to other people, and Daphne muttered that she didn't expect such an honor and would definitely write it down in her diary. After which she immersed herself in the book. The herbs from her past and present lives were very similar. She was lucky that she was an aristocrat here, but experience also meant a lot. At some point, she noticed that the children had become quiet. She thought that all this was empty words, but the twins really loved to read. She was interested to know what book he was reading, but it was written in a complicated way. The book was related to magical theory. It was strange that a child was reading such a book. Wasn't it difficult for him? After which, she turned her head to Hermano. At first, the girl thought he was reading a fairy tale, but then she guessed from the pictures that he was reading mythology. She leaned lower and lower, wondering if there was any information she needed, and the boy noticed that she was looking at his book. Suddenly, the child slammed the book shut, and Daphne realized she had frightened him. The girl apologized for scaring him. He was just so engrossed in reading. The book was probably interesting. Julius muttered that it was Hermano's favorite book. Before she could ask him who he liked the most, Julius answered for his brother, shouting out that he was a hero. But she asked Hermano who he really liked, and the child thought about it and then answered, like his brother, that he was a hero. Because he is strong, he and the heroine defeated the devil and brought peace to the empire. As it turned out, the children saw how she defeated Flora. Then, watching her through the window, Julius exclaimed with delight that the witch had defeated the devil Flora just like a hero. That's when Hermano began to see her as a hero. As soon as he started saying that he wanted to become like the hero from the legend, and one day defeat the devil. But Julius sullenly said that it was just a myth. Then Hermano added in a downcast voice that he thought about this when he was little. Daphne never thought about saving the world, but Hermano wants to become a hero. This won her over, and she answered the child that this meant that he already possessed the inherent qualities, and therefore was more suitable for the role of a hero than anyone else. But Julius immediately interjected. How can one be a hero without a goddess? He attacked with arguments that the hero helps the goddess defeat the devil, but now there is neither goddess nor devil, so he cannot become a hero. The blushing and stuttering Hermano agreed, and the boy sadly added that he just wanted to imagine it all. Making a scary face, she turned to Julius and said that even though he was not there now, if Julius did something, he would definitely appear. He tried to move away from her and again called her a witch, declaring that he would not do anything bad. When Daphne reminded him that he was calling her a witch again, he tried to explain that he did not mean it. Daphne couldn't resist and ingratiatingly asked if he knew that witches were on the devil's side. She would definitely call upon the devil, and made such a face that Julius fell off the sofa with a scream. After which she looked at Hermano and said that when the devil appears, the goddess will also come, and then the hero will be able to prove himself. The child with a beaming face declared that he would save Julius, and coming up, he offered his hand to his brother, who stood up with a belated feeling of shame. Although Hermano was timid, he was still an older brother. Born a little earlier when our heroine was about to leave, the boys asked where she was going, and Daphne read what she needed and was going to her room. They immediately started chattering that they were also leaving. Daphne was amazed that they would interrupt the educational process for her. She said that they could continue reading, but the boys declared that they had already finished and invited her to go with them. The girl understood that the real Daphne didn't get along well with the twins, and although they weren't her real brothers, they were much more innocent and sweeter than she thought. So why didn't Daphne like them? Hermano asked if she would go to the library again. Daphne answered confusedly that she didn't know. It wasn't really suitable for her. His face was so pale and sad when he asked that she wouldn't come again. The girl was amazed that they wanted her to read with them so much, and she said that it was okay, if not very often. And she really wanted to play with them, so she put forward a condition. Julius should call her big sister, like Hermano, but not a witch. Of course, Julius flared up and yelled at someone calling a witch sister. Daphne again threatened to call the devil because someone was calling her a witch again. Then she turned to the timid hermano, and he called her sister. She could barely contain her smile. Excitement was visible on the boys' faces, as well as the pressure Julius was putting on his brother. But the girl understood that if she laughed at them again, they would hate her, and so she decided to tease them a little. She addressed them with the air of a teacher, and Ehrman tried to pronounce the word sister. The boy grabbed her dress and with a pleading look asked, calling her sister, if she would come again. She couldn't hold back from such cuteness for long and answered yes. He was incredibly sweet, and the girl patted him on the head and said that she could come tomorrow. And Julius immediately ran over and said that he wanted to come too. Suddenly, Daphne remembered. Didn't they go to class? She suspected that if she thought about it that way, there should be classes now, but Julius, without looking at her, squeezed out that they were canceled, and Hermano muttered that he didn't want to go there. It was boring. Julius took his brother's dejected hand and declared that they already knew everything. There was nothing more to learn, demanding confirmation from Hermano. The atmosphere in the room changed dramatically and became tense. At this time, the maid and the teacher came in, and seeing the boys, she gasped, as they had been with the mistress the whole time. When Daphne asked what happened, the maid replied that the twins' classes had started a long time ago, and she added that she was taking them. Julius shouted that he would not go there. The maid sternly replied that they would be scolded then looked at Daphne and asked if the lady might have some business with them. Her appearance and gaze offended Daphne, who in turn asked if they were hinting that she was deliberately holding the boys back. When Julius suddenly interjected that he was bored, they were caught next to the witch, and he went to the maid. She said that he couldn't call the lady a witch, but he boldly replied, "What else should he call her?" And Hermano added that next time they need to get rid of the witch and go to class, he doesn't mind. Then he turned and looked at Daphne for a long moment. The girl shrank back. Were they really asking for her help? The twins were acting strangely. At this time, her maid was looking for her everywhere. Daphne looked at her watch. It turned out that so much time had already passed, it was time to go. Meanwhile, in the Wayne area, an angry customer was complaining about inflated prices at a store. But the salesperson thought it was fair considering the product. He was like a beast, insisting that the prices were too high and that the seller was speaking so arrogantly to the guests. There were threats to hinder the development of the business. At this point, the seller couldn't stand it any longer and barked out what he had just said. Finally, the client agreed to be counted and, having collected the goods, left. The salesman leaned back tiredly at the table and once again thought how tired he was of all this and wanted to quit. Of course, this store is draining all your energy. But he jumped up as if scalded when he saw the gentleman in the robe enter. It was Lucius who called the salesman by the name of Gale, noting that they had not seen each other for a long time. Lucius took off his hood and asked why Gale wanted to leave. Lucius himself was the owner of the store, as well as the Grand Duke of the Magic Tower. Gale became nervous, realizing that the owner had heard his words, and asked the master who was in the Magic Tower. Gale quickly changed the subject and handed the owner a new order for a love potion to be prepared using a spell. But he knew that this was a false and not particularly favorite area of the gentleman, so he announced that he had postponed the order. But to his greatest surprise, Lucius declared that he would take the order. In his opinion, people's feelings were so stupid. Therefore, if these people are hung upside down, they will not be able to get out. Then won't they fall in love with each other faster than any potion? Gale swallowed and remained patiently silent. Of course, the owner specializes in murder. Then he spoke about Lady Peregrine, who drank poison only because her fiancé left her, calling it such a pathetic act. Gale wondered why the owner did not leave. He replied that he would look after him, because he wanted to leave. Looking through the sales book, he saw that Lies Perrin had bought the antidote for his niece. Even though this girl was pathetic, she was lucky with her family. But this talk about love irritated him. What was that even about? I had to give him a painkiller injection, even though he didn't like them, but he needed to control his mana. Lucius lit a cigarette. They had to let in Gale, who looked scared and said that Daphne Peregrine was asking for a meeting to conclude a deal. The owner was indifferent. He called her a crazy woman and ordered to brush her off, but when the seller conveyed her words about the sacred relic that Mr. Lucius bought turned out to be a fake, he froze. She asked me to convey these words and wishes, not to buy anything there again. And now, he's sitting in the living room with Daphne, asking how she knew about the fake. Daphne couldn't help but quip that since there was a sofa opposite him, he should first invite the guest to sit down. Lucius apologized, citing that he had acted too hastily, and he gallantly handed the guest a cup of tea, offering her to try it. He chuckled when Daphne said that first he, as a guest, could drink tea when the host had not taken a sip. Daphne herself began to get noticeably worried, and maybe he added truth serum to the tea. Lucius is, after all, the final boss who confronts Crown Prince Jim Namju, also known as the Dark Shadow. That's probably why she's shaking so much now, and there was little information about this character in the original. But she clearly remembered that Lucius was the owner of the store and tried to destroy the world by destroying sacred relics, and the girl began to say to herself that she had nothing to fear. Nothing could be worse than the capitalist world in which she lived before. At that moment, Lucius drank the tea in one gulp. Our heroine couldn't take her eyes off him. This guy turned out to be much more attractive than she thought. He asked, and now she believes him. Daphne was on pins and needles and tried to calm herself down. The logical question was why she came here, and she had two reasons. The first was to find out whether this drug was made here or not. The first thing she needed to know was where the poison for Daphne was made. No matter how much she went through her memories, she couldn't find that it was she who made the poison. There is a high probability that someone gave Daphne this drug. This dark shadow will not answer her question that is causing him a headache. Lucius twirled the bottle in his hands for quite a while and declared that it was not made in his shop. In general, they take orders for death with great caution. The girl kept wondering if he was really telling the truth. Nevertheless, she decided to come here with the opportunity to at least find out something, when Lucius spoke up and said that he had already seen a similar bottle. Raising her eyes full of hope at him, Donna clarified that he knew the seller. According to him, similar bottles were used in the Assassin's Guild. He heard that they differentiate customers based on the color of the bottle and the cork. Karma exploded. That is, Daphne, who became the enemy of an aristocrat who had a grudge against her. It was impossible to prevent the contract killing. So how did she survive? Her only thought was to find the customer. Lucius chuckled at this impulse. It would clearly be difficult. He himself was not connected with the Assassin's Guild and did not want to get involved in it. Then Daphne reminded him that she had warned him against buying fakes. Time is money, and deals must be honest. The girl believed that he owed her with interest. She herself cannot go to the Assassin's Guild. They will kill her immediately. She was thinking about sending someone, but if her uncle found out and started asking her what she had gotten herself into since she had gotten involved with the Assassin's Guild, then the rich and quiet life in the countryside would be out of the question. She had only one way out: to find the customer with the help of a dark shadow. In the original, the underworld leader and dark shadow had a rather close relationship, so his words that he has no connection with the Assassin's Guild are a lie. Now that she has gone so far, there is no turning back, only to go to the end. And when he gave his consent, Daphne still couldn't comprehend whether it had really worked. Lucius said that he didn't yet know about the authenticity of the relic, but he would soon fix this. And then Daphne decided to take advantage of the chance. She explained that she had prepared it quickly, so the ingredients and effectiveness were questionable. Taking the vial from her hands, Lucius was clearly surprised that she had made it, and that their antidote, judging by everything, was ineffective. Daphne began to carefully explain that she felt better, and then she remembered how he knew about the antidote. The man explained that Marquise Peregrine ordered it from their store. The effectiveness of the antidote has been proven. He was surprised that she didn't know, and Daphne was surprised that her uncle trusted the black market. Her uncle lived an honest life so as not to cause problems for the family. Did he really care about her more than she thought? Most likely, his reputation improved because he went to the black market for his niece's sake. Unlike Daphne, who wanted to commit suicide because of unrequited love, her uncle is smart and took advantage of this. Lucius still wanted to know if there were any problems with his antidote, because it was quite expensive, but Daphne replied that no, hers was simply better. It was like a blow to the head. She didn't like the taste, and the smell was just awful. He smiled and said that everything was clear after our heroine directly stated that after drinking her medicine, the effect was obvious. Lucius added that he would carefully study each ingredient, but Daphne thought that he became somewhat gloomy. Apparently, his mood had worsened. He followed up with a counter-question about how the lady knew the relic was a fake, and then Daphne realized she had to answer correctly. If she had said now that she had inhabited the body of the heroine from the book, he would have considered her crazy. So the girl replied that saints have the power to distinguish sacred relics from fakes. She went through a lot to become a saint. Lucius incredulously clarified that it turns out she studied all the relics on the black market. Lucius began to test her, whether she had any evidence that the relic she was talking about was not the original. But Daphne insisted that it was, and she herself had violated her probationary period by running away from home. She described meeting him as a big risk. If anyone found out about it, she would have to spend the rest of her life in a small house on the outskirts, or marry a man chosen by her uncle. Lucius listened to her very carefully and was now serious. And Daphne's whole appearance spoke of the risk she was taking, whether she would sacrifice her status as a saint. Finally, after a tense wait, the man replied that he understood. He will begin the check. It will take about a week, Daphne rejoiced, although she remained serious in her appearance. Afterwards, the Duke asked whether she had arrived by carriage and, having received a positive answer, extended his hand. Daphne was confused whether this behavior was normal for a dark shadow in this world, and so far she hadn't met anyone except Lias and the twins. Without taking her eyes off his face, she saw that Lucius was about to say something else. The girl was completely transformed into tense anticipation. The dark shadow leaned very close to her face, holding her hand. She expected some mysterious confession, but Lucius informed her that the stairs down were steep, so she should be careful. The high heels made her feel uncomfortable, but Daphne liked his politeness. During this time, Lucius was constantly and discreetly studying Daphne. After seeing his guest off, he looked around. It was lively. Carriages were driving around. People were scurrying about. Gale looked at his master with a pleading expression. What just happened was out of the ordinary. The owner hates contact with other people, but he walked this girl to the door. He was uneasy. What did he promise her? Of course, Lady Peregrine was beautiful. And then a terrible guess struck him. Could it be that the owner fell in love and it was a date? The seller's hand reached for Lucius's robe, and he abruptly declared that he already knew his thoughts. Gale almost screamed. He needed to say something to his master. What benefit will they get from this order? But Dark Shadow ordered to shut up. Lucius asked if he should use magic again. Entering the pantry where the potions were kept, he told Gale, "It's fun, isn't it? The man wasn't poisoned by unhappy love. Someone poisoned him." Closing the door, the salesman asked with distrust whether Lady Peregrine should be trusted. There were bad rumors about her. Gale thought it was quite obvious that she wanted to accuse them of making poison. The girl who dreamed of becoming a saint tried to commit suicide, and after waking up, she realized what a mistake she had made. Gale was shocked when the owner showed the antidote that Daphne Peregrine created, and it became clear why the owner saw her off so gallantly. Lucius could take over the physical strength of another person through contact, and can also read people's thoughts. But in Gale's opinion, this girl was suspicious in every sense. Lucius remained silent until his assistant began to say what this girl was up to, and then replied that nothing. Gale clearly didn't expect that answer. He fidgeted with his handkerchief and asked again, receiving the same answer. Lucius felt nothing from Daphne Peregrine, and this worried him. He always felt people. Gale screamed in shock at the news. She couldn't exist then. How could she live at all? Lucius didn't know, and it was true. Daphne Peregrine became a great mystery to him. Looking at the bottle, he realized that there was no smell of love there, contrary to rumors. Her gaze was absolutely calm. This girl directly proposed the terms of the deal, laughed at his medicine, which even spoiled his mood. What kind of strange feeling is this? He then told Gale that it seemed her medicine was actually more effective than theirs. Gale couldn't accept such information. The antidote created by Daphne was better than the one in the magic tower. He suggested that it was poisoned. Opening the lid of the bottle, Lucius said that he thought so too. So I decided to check out what this girl was up to by drinking the contents of the bottle in one gulp. Gale didn't have time to scream, but Lucius didn't care. Even if it really was poison, a surge of mana would save him, so he would experiment on his body again. The seller held a painkiller in case of a surge. A kind of explosion occurred. This magic grew out of control. The only way to suppress it is to use spiritual power, which is the complete opposite of magic. He became a child again when that burst of power happened. However, this also did not help. After he was abandoned alone in the magic tower, he made many poisons to kill himself. If something goes wrong and he dies, people will only be happy. At least this way, he could get rid of all this torment. And then he remembered his headache. Lucius's headache disappeared. How could that even be possible? And the potion of this girl was the only one whose thoughts and feelings he could not read. She is the one who can cure his illness, but who the hell is this girl? And Daphne herself was feeling sick at this time. As it turned out, this world can also make you sick. At that time, her maid was holding an umbrella and reporting that Count Peregrine was not looking for her. Daphne asked the maid. She must have been very nervous all this time. She thought with sadness that, living in the same mansion, the relatives of her current personality are not interested in each other. Daphne pulled out a bag of money and handed it to the servants. They waved their hands in refusal. They were simply doing their job. Our heroine understood them perfectly well, and also that sometimes you have to pay for help. And so, calling her gesture just gratitude, She handed the bag into the maid's hands. The flattered servants thanked him. Daphne also handed her back the umbrella, but the girl did not take it. It was for ladies. When the maid finally handed Daphne the umbrella, she said that she was worried and suggested that the girl climb under the umbrella so that she would not get wet. Daphne understood that she was a villain, so they didn't trust her. Sometimes they had to give a bribe. Opening her watch, she realized that it was already late since dinner had been prepared. She asked where the twins were, to which the maid explained that the light was on in their study room, which meant they had not finished yet. She was very surprised that the children were studying at such an hour. Still, Daphne didn't believe that the children had just said that they didn't want to be distracted during the learning process and would eat later. The maid had to admit that the young gentleman's teacher, Count Mendez, had said so. Daphne remembered him. He is not a direct descendant of the Peregrine family from the Beldain family, a scoundrel like Flora in this mansion. She had seen the twins' strange reactions to classes before. Since Mentes was their teacher, they did not want to go. Of course, she wasn't very interested in whether the children were eating or not, but now everything inside her began to tremble, and she asked where the classroom was. Meanwhile, in the classroom, the teacher called his students pathetic. He reveled in the boys' vulnerability, saying he couldn't believe children with the last name Peregrine couldn't solve such a problem. He also reminded them that they regularly skip his classes, and that their sword skills have become weaker and their theory is at a low level. If Hermano just lowered his head, then Julius stated that the problem is not this. How can they write a plan and introduction to the theses in advanced magic? With a nasty grin, the teacher replied that the Marquis was capable of this at their age. So why couldn't they? He thinks that the young gentlemen resemble the late Lady Eileen. Seeing the children's faces, he noted with pleasure that they looked like Lias. He hated Lias Peregrine, being a gifted child and from a young age succeeded in fencing and studies. Therefore, although he was not a direct relative, he was confident that he would be accepted into Peregrine. But Lias Peregrine emerged victorious. It's a constant feeling of humiliation from losing. And at the graduation ceremony, Lias Peregrine gave the farewell speech. He never managed to defeat Laios, and he wished that this guy didn't exist. But he was the most suitable person for Peregrine and could return to childhood, take revenge on Laios who trampled his pride. Therefore, he thanked Flora for giving him this chance, saying out loud that Eileen blamed herself in heaven. The boys began to shake from the words. How could their mother have given birth to such stupid creatures? Julius could not stand such bullying that even their father, who lost his beloved because of them, does not communicate with them because they are so useless and worthless. The teacher probed the children's most vulnerable spots, and their father was disappointed with them. Hermano burst into tears that he was the reason his father was unhappy. He didn't want to be the reason. Julius also had tears streaming down his face, and the boy bit his lip to keep from bursting into tears, but his eyes burned with the fire of resistance. He tried his best to calm Hermano down, and the teacher watched with satisfaction the effect of his words. Slamming the textbook shut, he announced that they would end the classes there, and that he would increase the intensity tomorrow. At that moment, the door swung open with a bang, and she yelled who was entering during class without knocking. Daphne stood on the threshold with a stony face. The girl's eyes sparkled with indignation, and she replied that when she hears such nonsense, her mind switches off. Frozen? Mendez asked again. She's calling his words nonsense. Coming closer with a confident step, the girl stated that she had not said anything like that. Apparently, he had hit his head. Mendez cringed and blushed, not understanding why she came here. She has a bad relationship with children. If she complains to Laios, he will switch to him, and she herself will become relatively free. However, if this happens, he will die and may be kicked out of the family. The teacher knew Laios's temperament, and therefore could not allow this to happen, and scolded her for her inappropriate behavior during the lesson. The girl, without even blinking an eye, confidently stated what kind of behavior exactly. That he speaks like that about the deceased mother of children who are 20 years younger than him. A chill ran through him. Mendez realized that she had heard everything and was going to threaten him. He decided that then his excuse would be that everyone already knew that Daphne Peregrine was a disgrace and a curse to the entire family, and Laios would not believe a single word she said. The teacher glanced sideways at the children, who were the only witnesses. They feel terribly sorry for their father, so they will not talk about how pathetic they are and about the insult to their mother. His mouth twisted into a crooked smile. He had to go all the way to win. Then he started to evade, asking what she was talking about. Our heroine stared at him with a contemptuous look. He replied with a sly smile that he was not pretending. He only saw the lady's rude behavior. Daphne shook from such impudence, and she resolutely approached the teacher. When she stated that this could not be, he replied that he had no choice. Since he is engaged in training Peregrine, He will have to report this to the Marquis. The next second, he stood, covered in tea. He hysterically screamed that she was allowing herself to do this, and Daphne, using his tactics, replied that she didn't understand what he was talking about at all. Her eyes looked confident and determined. The whole appearance of the girl standing in front of him was unshakable. She reminded him so much of Lyhos. That look. Mendez shook with anger at Peregrine's gaze. When he squealed that the Count would not let her get away with this, Daphne playfully threw the cup on the floor. The teacher stuttered at her behavior, and Daphne demanded that she tell the Marquis everything in detail. A crazy gleam blazed in the girl's eyes, and she said that she would now cut out his tongue. Her beautiful face showed that she was not afraid. On the contrary, she was a winner. Daphne's look frightened Mendez more than her words about his tongue being cut out, and how he would then be able to speak. It was the same as Duke Peregrine's. All this signaled danger, and in the end, the teacher couldn't stand it and ran away shouting that she wouldn't get away with it so easily. Our heroine, of course, did not want to go that far, but that's too much to say about the children's deceased mother. Julius looked at her with wild eyes, and now Daphne said to be careful because there were shards on the floor. His question about why she helped them made Daphne look at the boy in surprise. Crying Hermano sobbed and said that it was all their fault. The boy lamented that it was because of them that his mother died, and that his father felt bad looking at them. Hermano's face was full of universal melancholy, and he added that if it weren't for them, their mother would still be alive, and their daddy would be happy. Julius also had tears in his eyes while his brother sobbed and said that everything the teacher said was true. Unable to bear it, Hulish shouted again why she helped them. The girl leaned over and looked at the boys affectionately and said, "She had to have a reason to help them. No matter, there is no one in this world who should not be born," she added to herself, "except for that bastard teacher." Hermano opened his mouth. Now Daphne seemed to him like some kind of unearthly goddess, and she called him a hero who would save anyone who got into trouble. With gentle movements, she touched the boy's face so that he would stop crying. Julius turned away sharply to hide his tears and told his brother to stop crying, and he innocently pointed to the crying Julius. The boys were red from tears, but Hermano smiled at the sight of his brother. Julius exploded, asking why Hermano was laughing, and he found it funny how his brother was trying to hide his tears. In a fit of shame and irritation, as well as fatigue, Julius shouted that it was all because of him. Now Hermano started whining again. Daphne watched the twins with affection, who, unable to bear it any longer, finally hugged each other with tears. After a while, Daphne was the one who felt irritated. She was stuck between the twins, who grabbed her and didn't want to let go. The girl, Daphne, already irritated, grumbled that she wanted to. She just felt uncomfortable. Then Julius turned a pleading look at her. She felt uncomfortable with them. These children made her laugh, and she pointed to the dress they were holding on to. Hermano understood everything, and blushing, let go of her dress. Remembering that the children hadn't eaten yet, she suggested that they go have dinner together. She couldn't resist teasing Ulysses that he didn't want to eat with his sister, expecting the usual reaction. Daphne understood that it was impossible to continue like this, but she couldn't help but tease them. But everything went wrong when she came to life. To her surprise, Julius, although embarrassed, calmly and sweetly cooed that he wanted to eat with his sister. Daphne felt as if she had tamed a stray cat, but it was impossible to show one's embarrassment, so she put on a serious look and, taking the children by the hand, led them to dinner. Before they had time to go out, they saw Daphne's umbrella lying around, which she had thrown down in a fit of anger, and an argument began about who would go with little sister Daphne under the umbrella. An argument ensued, and our heroine could barely control herself from bursting into screams. She sternly said that if they kept arguing, he would go without her. Then one of the boys kindly offered his brother to walk under an umbrella, and he would walk in the rain. The second one immediately declared that it would be better for his brother to go under an umbrella, but he was fine as is. The girl understood everything, and, stroking their heads, took their promise that they would no longer quarrel with each other. With one voice, the happy twins agreed. Insane Flora screamed at the servants why she had to stand there for so long asking where her umbrella was. The servant stuttered and apologized as he handed her an umbrella. The woman was angry with Daphne. She heard that even the former empress was disappointed in her. It infuriated her that this girl was obsessed with her Roderick and didn't listen to advice. Instead of dying from the poison, she behaves unpredictably. And these words of hers that Flora should take care of herself, and the fact that she compared her to her grandmother. She didn't like everything Daphne did. She bears a strong resemblance to her late mother, Amila Peregrine. The family's shame was that neither mother nor daughter possessed magic. It was sheer shame and disappointment, and in the end, Flora decided that it was time to finish off this useless girl, and in her dreams she saw herself as the beloved of Laius Peregrine. This lifted her spirits a little, and she asked the maid if everything was okay with the twins while she was gone. The servants became nervous and did not know how to explain everything to Madame Flora. In the end, they said that today they also arrived late to class, and the woman began to shake with anger. She pounced on the unfortunate maid, asking what the problem was. Flora herself believed that Mendez was an excellent teacher. After all, he was from a poor family and could offer nothing but knowledge. But when she heard that the twins had been spending a lot of time with Lady Daphne lately, Flora was taken aback. It was already too much for this useless girl to interfere with the education of children. And in a bass voice, she demanded to know where Lady Daphne was now. A new wave of shock from the answer washes over Flora. Daphne is having dinner in the dining room with the twins. And turning sharply, Flora declared that she was going to visit the lady. Before she had even taken a couple of steps, she saw Count Mendez walking towards her. Her eyes widened, and the woman asked what he was doing here and why he was walking in the rain. The teacher's eyes widened when he was asked if he had finished the lesson. And in a rage, he laid out everything that happened during the lesson, telling how Daphne behaved and, to top it off, spilled tea. The offended Mendez declared that he had endured it for the sake of Lady Flora and the Empress, but that he would no longer hold back and would file a complaint with the temple. Stunned, Flora barely managed to stop him, but the teacher left without turning around. I remembered the words of the Empress, who hinted to Flora that this was her last chance, and she really hoped that she would not disappoint her again. The woman was ready to kill Daphne only after finding her, and then the servant timidly called her. He posted that Lady Daphne went to the Wayne area today, but no one knows about it. Flora's face lengthened, and she suspected that Daphne was beginning to suspect something. She might say that she went there to buy accessories, but who will believe her? Anyone would think that this girl got involved with the Assassin's Guild, and this time, Flora decided to destroy her. Flora was determined to see it through this time. The children ate with appetite. Daphne kept asking them not to hurry. No matter how delicious it was, if they rushed, they would feel sick. Julius choked and coughed, trying to hold back the attack. But our heroine didn't blame them. They were very hungry. They had been starved for so long. And then Daphne realized that she was feeling good now. Warm, with delicious food and sweet children. She thought, she feels so comfortable and good now. If she goes so far away, she won't be able to eat with them like this. Daphne was suddenly horrified by her thoughts. She needed to run away from here. But the observant Julius noticed a change on her face and immediately began asking what was wrong with her. The girl immediately decided to change the topic and turned to Hermano, who was devouring his food. The boy made a sweet face and asked to be called Emile. Daphne was trembling. He asked to call him by his short name, and the numerous delicious foods were tempting. The boy said that eating together makes the food tastier. And again Daphne was surprised. These children were so happy to have company. It seems their father, Laius, never eats with them. She didn't understand why this was so. In the original story, he cared a lot about the children. The girl suggested that it could be due to his inability to express his feelings, especially considering his last words and his cold stone face, that attempting to commit suicide would be a disgrace to the family. But if he can't express his feelings, then how will the children know that he loves them? That's why they can't talk about Mendez's bullying. Out of indignation, she drank the entire glass of water. Julius stuffed his mouth again. Once again, tears began to flow from his eyes, and the girl handed him water. The girl sighed. After all, she had warned her. At this time, Leas Peregrine was walking along the corridor of the palace. Flora met him and told him about what his niece had done today, and therefore Count Mendez resigned. She also reported that Daphne had visited the Wayne area. Leas rubbed his face tiredly. Another disappointment from his wayward niece. But when he heard that Lady Daphne had recently become close to his children and was very worried about her influence on the young masters, Leas Peregrine turned pale. Shouting where the children were, he burst into the dining room just as Daphne was handing Julius water. Without remembering himself, he growled at what she was doing now. Daphne! The man shouted Julius's name, suspecting that his son would never open his eyes and would fall dead. He snatched the glass from the surprised child's hands and began asking how he was feeling, whether he had any strange sensations. Our heroine seemed to be observing everything from the sidelines. It began to dawn on her that her uncle had now decided that she was going to poison his children. Leas growled at the servant to take the children. The girl immediately asked her uncle if he had apparently heard about Count Mentes, and the man realized that it was all true. He was ready to incinerate his niece and harshly scolded her for such behavior. The girl was silent, and he demanded an answer as to why she did this. Instead of answering, Daphne gulped down the water from the glass that he had snatched from Julius. The man, who had turned pale again, screamed, trying to snatch the glass from her hands. The girl sternly asked him what he had decided that she was going to kill herself and poison the children, although she understood in her mind that he had the right to do so, given the actions of her staff in the past. But she understood that if the misunderstanding was not resolved, she would live under suspicion for the rest of her life. As calmly as possible, Daphne said that she really hadn't done anything, explaining that Julius had choked, so she had given him water. Therefore, if she had been poisoned, then logically she would have already died. Then the girl stood up resolutely and asked her uncle a question. If she said that she went to the classroom to save his children, would he believe her? Daphne's whole appearance struck him. She stood determined and serious. Lias, horrified by what he heard, asked again what she meant. The twins stood at the door looking guilty. The butler once again asked the young gentleman to come with him, reminding them of their father's words. She told the children that their father was already having a hard time with the ladies' antics, and what would happen if they didn't obey him either. The servant tried to send them to their room, but the boys did not leave. They didn't want to upset their father. The atmosphere was tense. They heard from the whispering maids that today was the anniversary of Lady Eileen's death, so the boys really didn't want to upset their father even more. But their conscience did not allow them to leave. Their sister was there. She had done nothing wrong. She was so kind to them, said comforting words that made their hearts feel so warm. Now they were making a choice of conscience, whether it would be right to ignore what was happening behind closed doors. Ignoring the sister who helped them feel love, even if it's hard for my father now. And Hermano timidly reminded him of the hero. His sister called him a hero. Hermano looked decisively at his brother. He had made his choice. Julius answered decisively, his face showing determination. The butler didn't have time to react before the children decisively opened the dining room door. Lias was surprised to see his sons return. The boys covered Daphne with themselves, deciding to protect their sister, saying that she was a good person. They said in one voice that their sister saved them. Silence reigned. Everyone stood and did not move. Lias looked at the children, their behavior as if he was seeing it for the first time. Daphne looked at them with a question mark, surprised that they stood up for her. The original said that they never had any conflicts before meeting the main character. Julius said that his sister stood up for them. Count Mendez often spoke about their mother. Hermano added that he later called them names. Their father did not believe what he heard, and therefore clarified what his son was saying now. Unable to hold back his tears, the boy quoted the teacher as saying that they were useless children. The brother added bitterly that the teacher also said that they should not have been born. Daphne couldn't believe that the children were going to tell. Seeing how hard it was for Hermano, she walked over and put her hands on the boy's shoulders to stop him from continuing. They wanted to lay out everything, but our heroine assured that this was quite enough. And she ran her hand over Hermano's trembling face, which was ready to burst into tears. In the end, she hugged him, and the boy gave vent to his feelings. Julius, too, could hardly hold back his tears. Lias stood as if turned to stone by what he heard, and the children rushed into Daphne's arms. Finally, the Count found his voice and said that in fact it was not she, but Count Mentes who harmed the children. He was furious. His emerald eyes were ready to strike the offender of his children. Daphne thought he was angry before, but the way he looked now was nothing compared to what she had seen before. It dawned on her that until now, her uncle had never been truly angry with his niece. Mentes was thrown behind bars. He screamed that everyone had gone crazy and for what reason, after which he added that he never threatened the young gentleman, and even if he had, he was a count, but no one answered him. Then Mentes threatened that this would turn into a war in the royal family when someone's silhouette appeared in the corridor. The teacher asked the stranger who he was, hoping that he had been sent from the imperial palace. The stranger did not answer, but simply held out a glass, and Mentes grabbed it and immediately drank it, saying that he would definitely reward his benefactor. He drank it all to the last drop, after which he asked for more water, complaining that he had been hungry for several days and had hardly drunk anything. A female voice answered playfully that it was strange that he hadn't gotten drunk, since she had prepared the biggest glass. And having taken off her robe, Daphne stood in front of Mentes. He immediately started shaking and asked what he was doing here. With shining eyes, piercing him with her gaze, the girl said that she was very worried. That's why she came. Her words about the teacher's excitement made him shake even more. The man looked at his glass, and a terrible thought flashed through his head. Smiling at his cleverness, Daphne said that he would die anyway, but she decided to test her medicine on him. He had harmed the children, so the pain was nothing compared to that. He began to choke, and Daphne, leaving, wished that he too could experience this pain at least once. For all his crimes, he received the punishment he deserved. Realized a few seconds later, he fell down dead. Daphne looked at him with regret, but she had only given him water. Of course she wanted to add poison, But then there would be talk that Lady Daphne poisoned a man and she would be put back in prison. This man was easily deceived by false beliefs, but her anger was not so easily quenched. She would like to cut off his legs so that he could never walk. Coming out of the dungeon, she froze. Her uncle stood in front of her with an inscrutable expression on his face. She was amazed why Lias was here. Did he really hear everything she said? Daphne imagined what he thought of her, that she had given Mentees poison. Our heroine already imagined what the newspaper headlines would write about her, but he turned around and walked away. And Daphne tried to explain to him what she was doing in the dungeon. The girl froze. Lias was not going to go and check what she was doing there. He asked, of course he deserves to die, but what if she did something to him? But Lias simply told her to come to him, and they walked silently to his office. He saw that she was standing in the doorway, surprised, asking why she wasn't coming through, but Daphne would have preferred to listen at the doorway. The man assured that it would not last long, and offered to sit down. The girl had barely taken a couple of steps when her gaze fell on the little book. She asked what it was, and Lias replied that it was Mentees' diary, which was found in the estate. She flipped through the pages and couldn't believe that this bastard kept a diary. In it, the former teacher poured out all his hatred on Lias. Daphne, of course, knew that he didn't love her uncle, but there were things written there like, if it weren't for Lice, he would have married Eileen, but instead she married that idiot who insulted the hated twins, promising to trample them. But she couldn't even believe that it was possible to treat small children like this. The Count, looking away, said that he always thought he was on the right path, but he learned that if you look around with an open heart, it can cloud your mind and give your enemy a chance to attack. And he believed that all this time, the children were following him. However, without looking around, he had no idea what pain his own children were experiencing. The man's heart sank with horror at the words his children were hearing. This whole situation greatly shook the Marquis, and he quietly asked Daphne for forgiveness. Lias thanked her not as an uncle, but as a simple man from the bottom of his heart. Judging by Daphne's memories, Laios had never done this before, and listening to him now, the girl could say for sure that he was not lying. She couldn't believe that Laios had just said such warm words to her. Our heroine asked for a reward in a firm voice. He assured her that he would give her everything she wanted, and if she wanted to marry Roderick, Daphne did not let him finish. She simply asked to eat with the children at least 3 times a week. The Count expected anything, but clearly not such a request. Daphne also froze, realizing what her uncle had just wanted to promise her. Why was the name of the most vile person in the novel mentioned? That's why her face expressed extreme bewilderment. Finally, her uncle asked if she wanted to talk about her engagement to Roderick Evans. Of course, she understood that her character, before her transformation into Daphne, was pining for this idiot, but having gathered her strength, she explained that she no longer loved Roderick. To make sure Lias was sure of this, she shared her insight on this matter when she was on the verge of death, concluding that it was simply an obsession and not love. Having assured that he sincerely regretted what he had done, the girl said that she gave up her dream of becoming a saint in order to simply live for herself. The Count's face was as if he saw in front of him not his niece, but someone very similar in appearance to her. Daphne understood that he still found it difficult to believe this, so she modestly added that in any case, she did not think as before and did not intend to marry Roderick, and she asked me to do her a favor. The request to dine with the children seemed to baffle the man. Daphne even suspected that he still blamed them for his wife's death. This assumption was like a cold shower on the man. He protested. How could anyone even think about such a thing? He's really hurt by the loss of Eileen, but it's not the children's fault. But Daphne gently said that the children don't know about this. She explained that the twins were having the same hard time as him and asked him not to distance himself from them, and that she did not think that the Marquis was to blame for what happened to Mentees. He and the twins had become distant from each other due to a misunderstanding. But someone has to take the first step to restore the family. Coming closer to Lias, the girl softly said that she wanted him to be that person. He remembered the faces of his children, so sad and lost, and Lias firmly promised that he would do it. When he said that she should also dine with them, the girl opened her mouth as if she had been offered something incredible. She awkwardly noted that it would be a little strange if she took part in family gatherings. Uncle didn't understand what she meant when she said that she was also Peregrine. These words brought a new understanding into Daphne's mind. In the original, her character thought that her family didn't love her, neglected her. Perhaps Daphne simply didn't realize the family's true feelings. The girl did not respond to this. There was an awkward silence, and the uncle hesitated and said that once the date was set, he would pass it on through the butler. He then told her to go back to her place and rest, making it clear that the dialogue was over. Daphne just wanted to leave, but she came to her senses. She asked the Marquis how he knew that she had gone to the Wayne area, and he told her that Lady Flora had heard from the servants and told him. Our heroine started shaking. This Flora again, she also felt like she was being set up because she had paid that guy. I wanted to burst into tears from my naivety. Lias asked why she went there, but until he trusted her 100%, the girl could not tell him the whole truth and said that she went to buy medicine. She felt much better, but has not yet fully recovered. But she said that she found out that he went to the black market to get an antidote for her. It was obvious that he felt embarrassed that they found out about this, and he said that she did not come to her senses for several days. The priest did not help, neither did various medications. Nothing helped. Another surprise befell Daphne. Lias invited priests, but the Peregrines do not have a very good relationship with the temple, and now Daphne was thanking him with all her heart. He smiled for the first time in so long and made her promise that she would never do such a stupid thing again. Of course she promised, and my heart felt so warm. And then he said that he would tell Lady Flora about this so that there would be no misunderstanding, adding that she could go. But the girl came to her senses. She had something else to say. Showing Mentees' diary, she said that it was written there that he often visited the temple. He tried to cope with the trauma of the incident with the Marquis by praying, and the prayers of the aristocrats were heard by Lady Flora. The girl tried to convey to him whether Lady Flora, who brought Mentees, really knew nothing. A spark lit up the Marquis' emerald eyes. He frowned and declared that he would take care of it. He turned around abruptly, and Daphne realized that he was angry again. But in reality, Daphne didn't know whether Flora was an accomplice. At this time, Lias called for the maid, and Daphne thought that since Flora attacked her first, she would respond in kind. She could not accept injustice, even if it meant death. Meanwhile, Flora was asking the maid how things were going, and she reported that the Marquis was not looking very well, and neither were the ladies. Flora was satisfied with the answer and dismissed the maid. Leaning back in her chair, she was pleased that Daphne was in trouble again, and she considered Mentees a fool because it was she who brought him to the palace, so that he would properly engage in teaching children, and not all sorts of nonsense. And after she gets rid of Daphne, her plan will be perfect. Her pleasant dreams were interrupted by the entrance of a maid. When she said that the Marquis was calling, Flora blushed like an embarrassed schoolgirl. But when she appeared before Lias, she pulled herself together, asking why she was needed. The Marquis stated that he wanted to free his sons from education. Flora asked again what he meant. She almost begged with a trembling voice that she had served him, the lady and the young gentleman, for so long, and now he wanted to fire her. Having received no answer, the woman threatened the imperial family, who would not let this go since they had personally sent her there. The count assured that he remembered everything about the imperial family, so he was not firing her. She could stay here, but he was freeing the children from classes. Flora did not understand what was happening. If she was not going to be a teacher and they were not firing her, what else could she do here? When the Marquis told her to go, the woman asked him to think again. He looked at her sternly and said that he would not repeat it twice. Flora was shaking, and Lias asked how much longer she was going to stand there. The woman lost control of the situation. She stuttered, asking herself why this was happening to her. If this continues, she will not be able to achieve her goal. And there was also Daphne. It was all this girl. The only solution that came to mind was to stage another incident in order to earn Lias's trust. The lives of 2 people depended on it. Daphne watched the plants that grew so quickly, but seemed so simple. It had been 4 days since she had spoken to Lias. Meanwhile, Mentees went crazy, talking to himself and not understanding why he was behind bars. Since the man who abused the children disappeared, a smile returned to their faces. Daphne was concerned about Flora's inactivity, but she assumed she would lie low for a while. She was also surprised that, despite the short time frame, the grass seeds grew so quickly. And the herbs were varied, so the idea came that it was possible to make different medicines. The girl looked at the green plant, not knowing what it was. Smooth and wet, it looked so-so. Her maid, hearing the words of the mistress, said that this is the whole point of portapo. It is sour, but tasty. Her parents always gave it to her when she had a cold. Daphne winced and said, "It looks so much like snot." The maid laughed, explaining that that's why she was little and cried and didn't want to eat them. It's also very tasty, and thanks to it, her sister grew much taller than her. Daphne wondered if it was possible not to eat this slime. Just the sight of it made her lose her appetite. Closing her eyes, she compared that it helps with colds and is also sour and children like it. Our heroine had a sudden inspiration and asked Shioka to help her. A few days later, Daphne was reading in the library. The guys arrived and she couldn't help but ask Julius if he came to sit with his little sister. The boy was a little embarrassed, but said that he had come to study. He could not neglect his studies under any circumstances. She affectionately patted him on the head and offered to check how hard he had been studying. The child had the second part of an incredibly complex book that she did not understand. She asked a little mockingly, and he really understands everything. Julius flared up that of course yes. Teacher Bennis explained it to him. And the boy unfolded the book and began to explain the notes he had made. For example, that one cannot use magic if there is no mana left in the body. Daphne was amazed at how much knowledge of magic such a small child had, hoping that he hadn't boiled his teacher. And then she said that first he should improve his spelling. Julius was so shocked to learn how many mistakes she had made that, to ease his disappointment, she gently explained that everything was fine. She had also made frequent mistakes as a child, and that she just needed to work on her spelling. Hermano looked up from his reading and watched as Daphne corrected what her brother had written, explaining which letter needed to be inserted and where the mistake had been made. The child, with childish spontaneity, asked when she became so smart. The girl clarified with a question. That is, before this, they considered her stupid, and the guys sincerely nodded their heads. So on the fly, Daphne came up with the idea that she became smarter very quickly, and there is one reason. Having decided to keep them waiting, she began to drag it out, saying that it was a secret. Could she tell them something like that? As expected, the guys began to ask her to share the secret, and asking to keep it a strict secret. Daphne pulled out a bag, saying that here was the secret of her mind. The children stared at the bag, wondering what it was. When she untied it, white circles appeared there. When Daphne put the candy in her mouth, the children also started asking for it. Hermano chewed and tasted the lemon. He liked, but my brother appreciated the sour taste more, calling it sour and delicious. Then Julius took another candy and added that he also liked them. They were also sweet. But the very next second, Daphne and Hermano were laughing at Julius's appearance. Our heroine was happy. Everything was just as she wanted. She invented a nutritional vitamin supplement for child growth and development. In this world, medicines exist mainly in powder form, as they are less effective in tablets, so it goes without saying that they were tasteless. So Daphne decided to make progress in this world by turning medicine into candy. It would be easier to eat, the texture would be more pleasant, and the taste would be guaranteed even without sugar. In this world, she was the first developer, and patents cost money, and money is a guarantee of a comfortable old age. So Daphne threw off the shackles of this world and went in search of her happiness. At the very peak of her dream, the children asked what these candies were called. She was confused. Hermano was surprised that the candies didn't have a name. The girl thought that, for the fact that she stole the name from her world and called the sweet that way, no one here would judge her, since they were made of slime. That decision about the name came to Popo in a split second. The kids liked it. The name was cute and similar to the name of a puppy. Daphne's gaze fell on the book Emile was reading, and she noticed that these formulas were too complicated. The boy's silence meant consent, and our heroine suggested going and asking his father for help. He specializes in just that. At this proposal, Hermano blushed and opened his mouth. The girl guessed that he had thought about it himself, but the boy said that he did not want to distract him from work. Over the past few days, his father had not said a word during dinner. Having stroked the boy's head, she herself understood that it was a little cruel, but she knew that her uncle loved children very much and assured him that his father would certainly be happy to see him. At first, Hermano couldn't believe it, but her gentle persuasion played a role. Julius immediately jumped up and said that he also wanted to ask him something and would also go. It was decided that all three of them would go. Lias was sitting in his office, as usual, immersed in work. Rubbing his head, he felt very tired. In his head, he replayed the events with Montes. It was good that it did not escalate into a territorial war, but even 10 bodies were not enough to take responsibility for the disappearance of the Count. But he was glad that the children would not have to experience any more difficulties. 2 days earlier, their first dinner together had taken place, and it had been accompanied by cold tension. Daphne tried her best to somehow diffuse the situation. Hermano and Julius ate in silence. From all this, the Count concluded that the children did not want to have dinner with him, as he had assumed. It's hard to sit with someone you don't like, so he decided to cancel dinners with the children. Just at that moment, Daphne knocked. The girl said that she wanted to talk to him about something. This concerned dinners, and then Leah said that he also wanted to talk about this. From that moment on, there would be no more joint dinners. Daphne even screamed why this was so. The man replied that he felt like the children were uncomfortable with him, and so was he, so it would be better to have dinner separately, as before, and the twins standing behind the door were ready to burst into tears. She explained that the children had been studying in the library today and would like to clarify some things about magical schemes. Lias opened his eyes and was very surprised to see his sons. The guys apologized for disturbing him. They didn't want to put him in an awkward position. The Count became very nervous and haltingly explained that he did not hate them. He just thought that they were uncomfortable with him. He sat down, looked at them kindly, and said that he was very glad that they came to him. The man's tired face expressed joy when looking at the children, and so he asked them to ask whatever they wanted, as long as they did not hold a grudge against him. The twins burst into tears at their father's touching words. They forgot what kissing or hugging was, and therefore awkwardly shuffled around when their father asked them to come to him. Lias said that together they would resolve all difficulties. When the man opened the book and saw a circled note with a sincere, childish wish that he wanted to become a master swordsman like his father, tears welled up in his eyes. He hugged the children tightly, feeling a long-forgotten warmth. Hugging them, he cried, realizing that he himself had made such a mistake and built a wall between himself and his children who needed him. Daphne watched as the family reunited. Several days passed, and our dinners together became much more lively. The children offered her to try different delicacies, and that awkward atmosphere was no longer there. The boys calmly asked their father about magical tasks. Our heroine was sincerely glad that they would soon become a truly close-knit family. The maid came up and handed her an envelope. Opening the letter, she read a message that her custom-made cake was ready. A look of confusion appeared on the girl's face. She had not ordered the cake and assumed that it was a message from the Dark Shadow. Julius asked her what cake she ordered. She had to lie that she wanted a cake and ordered it. She asked her uncle if she could leave the estate for a short time, promising that the incident would not happen again. Lias clarified that she didn't like their bakery. The girl protested, making up on the fly that she simply wanted something special. Julius looked at her and then said, "Does she really want to meet that bastard Roderick?" She even jumped up, wondering how much longer this Roderick would be mentioned. Lias corrected his son so that he wouldn't express himself like that, and he let Daphne go and told her to return before sunset. Our heroine beamed and promised to return on time. Entering the Isles store, Daphne realized how good her maid was and took care of her clothes. Julius came down, greeted my lady, and said that he was glad that she found him, the girl quipped, and it looked like she wouldn't be able to find him. Lucius smiled. She immediately guessed who the sender was, realizing that all the rumors about her were lies. He handed her a report which stated that the poison had indeed been ordered from the Assassin's Guild, but the customer had already died. The customer was a high-ranking figure, Dark Shadow assumed, and he asked her if she wasn't surprised, but her face said that it was predictable. Daphne asked if he had checked the antidote. Lucius replied that of course he had and returned the bottle to her. He sincerely said that he was surprised how she could cook it. It's not easy to cook something like that, even in a temple. If he sells it, it will cost a fortune. But the girl interrupted him. No one will buy it under her name. Lucius repeated that he believed as he had said. Medicine is an area where trust is important. He brought up the topic of whether she had thought about where she would like to sell her goods. Everyone understood that the temple would never accept the Peregrine family's magical elixir. They don't like magic there, and refuse offers from private pharmacists, so there's only one way for a lady to sell her product, through illegal distribution channels. That is, it is he himself. Lucius especially needed her elixir, so he had to make a contract with her. But in order to gain the upper hand in the negotiations, a tactic of approach was necessary, but the girl immediately cut him off. She did not say a word that she wanted to sell the elixir through him. Lucius's face expressed genuine surprise, and he asked why. Daphne replied that there would be problems if he sold her elixir in the criminal world. She wants to earn money legally, and if he is put in prison, will he be held responsible for it? Therefore, she stated that it was necessary to find a private pharmacist, but if he was blinded by rumors about her and doubted the value of her elixir, then she would reject such a person and find someone with whom she could work. Lucius hung his head dejectedly and then offered a service. He could help her find such a person. Having said that there are pharmacists not associated with the temple, it is not that difficult. Daphne was grateful for the help. They agreed that Lucius would contact her as soon as he found someone, and, like last time, extended his hand to guide her. She put her hand in his and said that it was very sweet of him. He asked if she would go straight to the estate, but Daphne shared her plans that she wanted to walk around the market, look around, and maybe even find a business partner herself. She felt awkward, and our heroine explained that it wasn't that she didn't trust. It was just that you never know how things can be. Dark Shadow muttered that he understood everything without stopping studying the girl. This lady has already refused his proposals several times, and he cannot even count her emotions. As they were going down, his stomach twisted. The man didn't understand whether it was discomfort or some other feeling. He was still confused, to tell the truth. This girl had all the qualities that he didn't like. Gale greeted his owner with tension. Once again, Dark Shadow was on edge. I remembered her smile, her words of gratitude for his manners. He looked at the salesman and asked if there was a more suitable partner for the lady than him. Gale decided that she had hurt his pride. Lucius said thoughtfully that he didn't want her to find anyone else. The previous plan wouldn't work, so he decided to make another appointment, and taking off his black robe, this time, decided to appear in his original form. He would have to hide this, and Lucius opened the door. He rehearsed what kind of facial expression he would make. It was so exciting. Daphne walked through the market, realizing that she had gotten carried away playing the role of a strong and independent person. And if the Dark Shadow had killed her, the girl promised herself not to interfere in anything from now on, and would refuse any temptation to do everything alone. In any case, since she left under the pretext of going to the bakery to buy something sweet, her gaze fell on the potion shop. The seller showed his love to the customers with the most flattering look. He rattled off that his store had everything from basic elixirs to painkillers, emphasizing that potions were sold here with the permission of the temple, and asked what potion she was looking for. Taking the first bottle she came across, she muttered something about the temple. The seller immediately began to praise that she had just taken high-quality medicine from the temple. The amount was quite decent, 20 gold, but it was so rare that there were only 20 jars left. 20 gold pieces for one jar was too expensive, but given the location of this store, Daphne assumed that it was the best in this area. However, the owner emphasized his connection with the temple, so he would never risk signing the contract. The girl put the bottle down, sighing that it was time to move on. Before she could think about looking at other places, a stranger in a white robe appeared and stood in front of her at the counter. It was surprising that it was so big, but she didn't notice it, and now it scared her. She froze when she heard the stranger ask the price of the same potion that she had asked for, but the merchant named it at 50 gold. But just now, this merchant offered it to her for 20 gold. Thinking what a jerk the seller was, the girl decided to move on, wondering who would buy the potion for that price, when she immediately heard the stranger's answer that he was buying it. She promised not to interfere anywhere else, but everything inside was raging. How could one be such a fool? And our heroine, without thinking twice, pushed the stranger away and resolutely stood in front of the merchant. The girl loudly protested, calling the seller a swindler because he had just quoted her a price of 20 gold, so why had he raised the price now? The merchant clearly did not expect such a turn of events. He defended himself by saying that she didn't even know what kind of elixir it was, so how could she set a price? Daphne argued that it was illegal to change the price of a product set by the manufacturer, and that it was even more illegal to change the price of a product manufactured in a place like a temple. The counter question was whether this medicine was really made in the temple, and the red seller stuttered and confirmed. She went on the offensive again, asking whether permission had been obtained to change the price. There was nothing to answer, so the merchant, distorted with rage, shouted out, "Who is she?" and swung at the girl. With a magical answer, she pushed the seller away, claiming that he was the first to try to sell a counterfeit product. Donna looked at him with an icy gaze. The seller trembled when he recognized who was standing in front of him. He began to beg for mercy, saying he didn't know who was standing in front of him. Daphne only said that she would take care of his lying tongue later. But first, she decided to leave him to be torn apart by the angry crowd. She walked away while people shouted at the seller that he was a scammer and demanded a refund. Realizing that she had to leave, the girl nevertheless stopped. Behind her, she saw that same stranger in white, and she was surprised why this man's actions did not correspond to his status. He stood in the crowd as if lost. Daphne had to go up to him and say, "He doesn't want to be trampled here like this," he said, surprised and trusting. "Okay." When they got out of the crowd, Daphne had no strength and could hardly breathe. It was surprising that they ran together, but only she was out of breath, and the young stranger thanked her for her help. Our heroine advised him to be more careful. He seemed too naive. The more money, the less you should trust. The stranger thanked her for the advice, and then she couldn't utter a word, frozen in stupor. The guy took off his hood and looked at her with a trusting gaze. At first, Daphne thought she was looking at an angel. Her brain was feverishly going through all the characters in the novel, and there was only one man with silver hair and red eyes. These were the distinctive features of the imperial family. They were distinguished by their golden hair and sky-blue eyes. However, the second prince was different, with dazzling silver hair and glowing red eyes. He was the half-brother of Crown Prince Jin Namju and was banished to the magic tower immediately after he received the dukedom. And he was Lucius. However, in the original it was said that Lucius died from a rare disease and did not appear again in the novel. Daphne stared at the young man, who timidly asked if she was okay. I had to lie that my eyes darkened for a second, but otherwise everything was fine, adding to myself that it was from the light of his halo. A smile appeared on the angelic face. Daphne couldn't get her head around how the supporting characters could be so attractive. The guy introduced himself as Lucius Winterrose Gresvel. Daphne introduced herself in response, and Lucius smiled and said, "So she is Lady Peregrine." The girl was surprised by his reaction. He stood and smiled. Usually when people heard who she was, they got scared. Besides, she is lower in status than him, but he treated her with respect, and he was almost cheated at the market. She attributed this to the fact that he lives in a magic tower and knows nothing about the outside world. Lucius thanked her, but Daphne had to go back. After all, this was Jin Namju's half-brother. If she got involved in this relationship, she might get confused in the original story. And having made a curtsy, she began to say goodbye, but the guy stopped her. He said shyly that he wanted to repay her for her help. Daphne thought that if she were from this world, she would definitely be struck by the beauty of this guy, but she possessed the heroine of the novel and was busy with the rules to avoid dangerous acquaintances. The girl politely assured that she was fine and that she hadn't helped to get anything in return. In any case, he was the most handsome man she had ever met and the most naive. Seeing his surprised, childishly naive face now, he could be used by a dishonest person. Lucius smiled and then said that he was also the owner of a magic tower, so maybe he needed help after all. His look was simply discouraged when Daphne this time answered that he could not help in any way. His eyes, just like during their meeting in his shop, slid and glanced to the side. Our heroine noticed that he became tense, although he didn't say anything. Lucius said that an uninvited guest was coming here, and the girl turned around. The arrogant young man walked with a leisurely gait and, grimacing at the sight of Daphne, threw out that she was here. At first, she didn't even understand who it was, but by his behavior, she recognized Roderick Evans. In the novel, he was the saint's lover, and also Daphne's ex-fiancé, with whom she was terribly obsessed. The girl felt a strong tension. Apparently, this is how Daphne's body reacted to the memories. Roderick approached with contempt and said that he heard about her critical condition. As soon as she got better, she began to stalk him. While he was saying how tired he was of it, Daphne sighed heavily. He was simply infuriating her, and no matter how much she didn't want to, he continued to haunt her. Only this time, in reality, I remembered the face of my uncle who reproachfully read her that she wanted to end her life only because Roderick abandoned her. Flora, our heroine, felt so much pain for stupid Daphne and how this guy humiliated her. Roderick began to say that no matter how hard she tried, he would not marry her. But he did not have time to continue, as Daphne replied that she was not at all against it. Smiling calmly, she added to his question and wide-eyed that she herself was not against it, and also did not want to marry him. She was calm and cheerful, and easily said that she did not love him. Lucius smiled slightly at her answer, but was pleased. Roderick grimaced and demanded proof that there were no feelings. He didn't believe it, and all this was only because she was caught stalking. The girl confidently said that people's opinions could change faster than he thought. Recalling what happened in the novel with her character, she stated that he abandoned his fiancée and shared feelings with Lisa Capralal. That's when her love went out like a candle flame, and their meeting was a misunderstanding. He began to irritate her. She says that she doesn't love him. He doesn't believe, claims that she personally saw him with another. He denies it. He was hurt by the words of the one who looked at him like he was God, that he was behaving strangely. Suddenly, Lucius burst out laughing, apologizing for not being able to hold back. Roderick asked who it was, and then went on the attack, calling him strange, and Osama had already gone to look for another man. Our heroine looked at him with disdain. This scoundrel is trying to shift the blame onto her because he is afraid that the public will find out, and how could Daphne love him? While she was trying to figure out how to get rid of him, Lucius leaned over and whispered if he could repay her for her help now. Daphne thought that nothing would happen if she asked him for help once. Lucius asked to be excused in that case. He knelt down and kissed her hand. Roderick and Daphne stared at him in complete bewilderment when she said that he had been looking forward to this meeting with her. Lucius's gaze was full of passionate and languid love, begging for a response to his feelings. And the young Duke lowered his hood. Roderick sweated and gasped when he saw the Duke. Holding Daphne's hand, Lucius said that he was pleased to meet Sir Roderick. He bowed in the blink of an eye, muttering that he didn't recognize the Duke, and that's why he was talking all this nonsense. Then he turned his gaze to Daphne, saying that Sir Roderick was not entirely mistaken. He spoke about his feelings for Lady Daphne so convincingly. His declaration of love made Roderick stand up straight, gently putting the hood on our heroine. He, with the look of a love-weary man, whispered that it was time for them to be alone together. Daphne's mouth dropped open. She almost believed his confession, but then she pulled herself together. After all, this was an operation to destroy Roderick. They turned to see Roderick still standing behind them. He had the face of a man who had been abandoned by the beauty who had been chasing him everywhere, and had found herself a much better match, replacing him not just with the Duke, but with the owner of the Magic Tower. And Daphne knew that Roderick would not tell anything about her and Lucius, who would believe that the Duke was dating the villain Daphne. The plan was really good, and the girl took Lucius's arm and they went. But as she was leaving, Daphne told her former lover that she hoped they would never meet again. Her heart was light. She had finally put an end to it, and Roderick stood there as if cold water had been poured on him. He couldn't get his head around the fact that Daphne was now with the Duke. An excited servant ran up to him, frightened that his master was running so fast. Roderick rudely and contemptuously threw away the servant's hand. He was shaking with indignation, and involuntarily he remembered his first meeting with Daphne. This meeting took place many years ago on a significant day when the temple developed new painkillers. He was the only child in the banquet hall, and he was bored. Looking out the window, it seemed to him that something flashed in the street. Then, little Roderick darted out of the hall into the temple courtyard. He was attracted by the huge fountain of the goddess. But not only it, there was something else near it. Not far from the fountain, a girl was lying in the water. She was unconscious. Roderick was scared by what he saw, what happened, why she was lying there, and maybe she was already dead. Then he decided that he needed to leave quickly and got ready to run. The girl lying near the fountain began to move, and the boy decided to make sure he was not in any danger before running. He ran up and started to lift the girl, asking if she was okay. The girl was all wet and had barely come to her senses, so she couldn't answer clearly. But then she looked at him piercingly and said in the same voice that it was he who called her. Her smile was frightening. Roderick stood there confused, not understanding what she was talking about, but he realized that it was Daphne Peregrine in front of her. She tried to say something else, but began to breathe heavily. Daphne fell to her knees again, and Roderick asked the lady to stand up. By that time, people were already running. Roderick's frightened father ran up, shaking his confused son and asking what had happened. Roderick didn't understand anything. His father grabbed him by the hand and dragged him away. The event was cancelled. The demon that was imprisoned suddenly disappeared. When he turned around, he saw that the maids were already running to Daphne. A few days later, they met again in the corridor of the palace. Daphne was cheerful and simply charming. She curtsied and introduced herself, flirtatiously folding her hands. She said that on that day, he saved her from falling into the fountain. Roderick was confused and didn't know what to answer. He was embarrassed at the sight of this girl, thinking about how beautiful she was, but she would have been even more beautiful if not for the commoner's blood mixed in. The girl languidly said, calling him Mr. Roderick, that he was now her hero. The boy asked again and blushed even more. Daphne was already looking at him with loving eyes. As a result of active courtship, and thanks to Peregrine's blood, which even money cannot buy, they became engaged. But the rumors that Daphne was a timid person were a lie. She was simply obsessed with Roderick. Her obsession bordered on madness. So, no matter what happened, he thought that Daphne would never let him go, and now he felt bad at heart, although it would seem he should be happy. But the thought haunted him. When the hell did she manage to start a relationship with the Duke? He turned around abruptly, and the servant called out to him in confusion. Roderick! Lucius grabbed his hand, and Roderick, with a distorted grimace, ordered him to remove his hand. There was such a power in him that Roderick was frightened, and Lucius said that he wanted to give him advice, leaning towards his ear. With a chuckle in his voice, he whispered that he had been abandoned. It was like a slap in the face for Roderick. Now Daphne breathed a sigh of relief. Roderick would not pursue her anymore. At first she was worried, but everything went better than she thought. It even became curious what they were talking about. Roderick didn't look his best, but it was all thanks to Lucius. Daphne had so much she wanted to tell him, but first of all she curtsied and thanked him. Lucius, his eyes shining, replied that he was only too glad, but his face changed when Daphne said that he should not contact her anymore. When the Duke asked why this was so, the answer was because she was Daphne Peregrine. He guiltily began to ask if he had done something wrong, but she simply looked worried. Our heroine didn't want to offend such a cutie, but she had to explain it somehow. In fact, he really did help her out. If Lucius hadn't helped, due to the trauma of the broken engagement, she would have started calling lovers home, turning them into her slaves, and leading a depraved lifestyle. but now he's asking what he did wrong. Moreover, he has no benefit from getting closer to her. As delicately as possible, the girl answered that he had done nothing wrong. Moreover, she herself asked him for help, but she was telling him because she felt sorry for him. How he reminded Daphne of a puppy. She found this association funny, but for some reason, Lucius's expression suddenly changed. Daphne decided it was because of the villainous expression on her face. One way or another, all that remains is to submit a statement of rupture to the Imperial Palace. We need to finish off Roderick as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Lucius kept his eyes on her. Pressing his lips to her hand, he whispered in a velvety voice that such a sweet aroma emanated from her. He had heard it somewhere before. Daphne shuddered at such a sudden impulse. His beauty was truly dangerous. A few minutes ago, he looked so shy. It's like in the ancient myths, according to which she can't touch him, even despite her burning desire. How Daphne wanted this. It was hard to resist Lucius. And then the girl was horrified by her own vicious thoughts. What was she thinking about? There was an innocent child in front of her. He just said that she had a sweet aroma. And taking out her candies, she asked if he was by any chance talking about this. The girl handed him some lollipops, saying that they were Popo candies and that she made them herself. Lucius looked with such tension at the candies that Daphne gave him. Seeing his expression, she took one in her mouth, saying that there was no poison in it. He chuckled and said that he would hardly be able to eat his fill on just sweet candies, and silently said that his advances weren't working on her at all. However, he took the candy into his mouth. Daphne, hearing his muttering, asked what he said, but Lucius waved it off. The girl was glad that he liked the candy, but when she took out her watch, she realized that it was already so late. She said that she had to go, otherwise the bakery would sell out of all the desserts. Having quickly hurried away, at some point, Daphne turned around and promised that there would be no misunderstandings. If he was worried about rumors, then she would say that nothing would ever happen between them. He barely managed to squeeze out that it wasn't worth it, but Daphne had already run away. Lucius managed to shout to her that there was a good bakery nearby, which convinced our heroine even more of his cuteness. And having thanked him, she left Lucius in complete chaos and confusion. After, Lucius sincerely couldn't understand that Daphne said that she didn't care about Roderick, so why not fall in love with him? It's simply impossible. Women have always praised him and his beauty, begging him to give them just a glance, and there hasn't been one yet who hasn't fallen for his beauty. The Duke sadly said that he did not understand anything. The man expressed doubt that maybe he was missing something and he didn't realize it. But Gale fearfully assured him that this was not the case. The owner said not to be shy. If you know something, then let him speak. He started listing perhaps personality, but said that it was out of place. Sympathy, that was also not it. It turned out that in Gale's opinion, Lucius lacked a better attitude towards him, the seller. Sitting in his room, Lucius looked at the lollipops and thought about Daphne Peregrine. She's kind of a villain, but she carries candy in her pockets, and in general, she turned out to be much more interesting than he thought. That day, he was also offered a candy. He was sitting behind bars, alone, tired. They asked him if everyone was having fun. But why was he sitting here alone, if it hurt him? The girl handed him a candy through the bars. It was Daphne Peregrine who said that this way, he would forget about the pain for a while. He didn't remember anything else. He generally considered it a dream, but her face and laughter revived that memory. Because of her strange expression, forgotten memories flashed in my head. But before, such a sweet aroma emanated from her. Having smelled the sweetness, the Duke realized that the smell was completely different. And as for that elixir, he won't let it fall into the wrong hands. Lucius also realized that he still had a lot to learn about this girl. Meanwhile, a satisfied Daphne was returning home. She was met by a maid who was glad that my lady had returned so quickly. Taking the box of sweets, the girl whispered to the lady that a young gentleman had arrived. At first, Daphne didn't understand who she was talking about, but then it began to dawn on her who it could be. The guest had already been served and helped to settle in. It was Laius Peregrine's younger brother, Cian Peregrine. Unlike Laius, he is a very kind and sensitive person, and also the only one who did not give up trying to build relationships in the family. Of course, everyone, including Daphne, had no idea about Cian's feelings. As soon as she asked where her uncle was, she heard a female voice calling her. The girl turned her head. She immediately understood who was in front of her. A woman with kind brown eyes was gasping about how long they hadn't seen each other. It was Cian's wife, Rivnel Peregrine, who, like her husband, treated Daphne warmly. She approached Daphne and said that she was walking in the garden when she smelled such a delicious aroma. Our heroine felt a pang in her chest. In the original novel, Rivnel dies as a result of a miscarriage, and Cian, unable to cope with the loss, commits suicide. It was sad to meet Rivnel knowing the future, but the woman herself took Daphne by the hands, offering to go inside and apologizing for the late arrival. Another friendly face. Daphne felt awkward and looked away. But Rivnal was sincerely glad to see Daphne after what happened to her. The woman justified herself by saying that she didn't want to bother her at all. Daphne got nervous, apparently because of her facial expression. And in the original novel, the real Daphne was generally rude to Rivnal, claiming that she was sucking up, that Daphne was a very temperamental lady. While our heroine was immersed in Rivnal's memories, with a clearly upset face, she said that then she would go. Daphne didn't want Rivnal to think of her as a villain, especially considering their last encounter with the original Daphne, and suddenly the girl blurted out, "Would Rivnal like to drink tea?" She had bought various sweets, and she frankly admitted that she had no friends to share a meal with. Rivnal still couldn't get over such a proposal, and carefully asked if she really could. And realizing that Daphne was seriously inviting, she happily announced that she would make tea. They sat on the terrace to drink tea. Rivnal herself brewed tea from leaves brought from the sanatorium. Not that Daphne could influence the outcome of her life, but she was very sorry that such a good person would die in vain. The girl asked how the cookies were, and Rivnal happily shared that they were very tasty, and the child also liked them. The woman specified that these cookies were from Daphne's favorite bakery, and she nodded. She left under the pretext of a cake, so I had to buy some sweets. But Rivnal's eyes were still worried. She carefully asked if Daphne was okay. The girl talked about rehabilitation and the medicine her uncle bought. But our heroine saw that the woman was interested in something else, and she guessed what it was. He said outright that he was breaking off his engagement to Sir Roderick. And besides, she no longer wants to be a saint, and as for suicide, she will not repeat such stupidity again. Apparently, Rivnal was so happy with these words that she suddenly jumped up, frightening Daphne. Afterwards, she put her hands on her stomach with satisfaction and said that it was such a relief to hear that. Daphne also watched her interlocutor, and much of it seemed strange to her. Roderick was cold with her, but skillfully hid it under a mask. Starting secret affairs, he was never suspected of treason, but she didn't understand why Rivnal didn't love him, and the girl lied that after she woke up, she didn't remember much. And she directly asked why her aunt was against her engagement to Roderick. Now, the woman admitted that she accidentally overheard his conversation with other club members, and he said all sorts of nasty things about Daphne. Daphne's eyes flashed angrily, but even after these words, Daphne still wanted to be with Roderick Evans, claiming that after the wedding, everything would change. That's why Rivnal admitted that she didn't like him. How could such a person change? Daphne replied that no, that only happens in fairy tales. And I told my aunt that this scoundrel allows himself to say all sorts of nasty things about his bride in front of other people. Isn't it disgusting? How can a couple live without mutual respect and create a happy family? And she warmly thanked her aunt for the truth. Rivnal smiled warmly in response. She assured that Daphne made the right decision, but she didn't understand why Rivnal was so thin, with those sunken cheeks. If she takes such good care of herself and gets the best care. And how did it happen that she had a miscarriage and died? At that moment, the maid brought tea. Rivnal said that this medicinal tea is very good for pregnant women, and for women in general. This tea was prescribed by Dr. Rivnal, and she suggested that Daphne try it too. Smell the tea. The smell reminded her of some familiar grain. The taste was very familiar, and she understood what this tea was made of. She carefully asked Rivnal about tea, and she willingly shared what a wonderful doctor she had who prescribed this tea. It was delivered from abroad. She had been drinking it since she left the mansion. 2 months have already passed, and if we look back, Rivnal's health worsened exactly 2 months ago. So Sion took her to a sanatorium for treatment. However, she did not get better, and the reason is that she continued to drink this tea. Perhaps this was the cause of the miscarriage. And under the pretext of not feeling very well, Daphne asked her aunt to meet with the doctor. The woman immediately became worried that everything was so bad. Our heroine explained that everything was not that bad, but it was worth getting examined. Rivnal reported that the doctor was in the 3rd building. The doctor sat in the room assigned to him, talking to himself about how you can't understand these rich people. Moreover, contemplating his medical gown, he dreamed that one day he would show off in it in the temple. At some point, the door opened with a bang, and the enraged doctor wanted to curse the disturber of his peace with the last words. But he was confused when he saw Daphne Peregrine on his doorstep. The doctor, sweating from confusion, began to apologize. He didn't know that it was a lady who had come to see him. She asked him to tell her about the magic tea that he gives to her aunt. She praises that the taste is wonderful, so she wants to ask for some for herself. Dr. Spencer, becoming even more nervous, mumbled that it would be difficult. Daphne's determined look frightened him. She demanded that he explain to her that she couldn't drink it, that they couldn't find out about the tea, but he realized that if he refused her, it would look even more suspicious. Having asked her to wait, he went for tea, deciding that this stupid girl would not guess anything anyway. I gave the girl the bag and advised her to add it to water or milk. It would be even tastier. He keeps the rest for Lady Rivnal, so he can only give this. Daphne walked away and tried the tea on her tongue. Everything was as she thought. There was a big problem. Because of the doctor, the pregnant woman continued to damage her health. Who could be that influential person who is able to obtain powder from abroad? There was no evidence, but there were vague doubts. Her plan was to find out as much as possible about it. The disgruntled servants entered the room. Sioka devoured the sweets brought by her mistress. In justification for not working, the girl explained that Milady had brought a bunch of sweets. One of the girls angrily hissed that the workday was not over yet. Sioka invited the girls to share the goodies with her. This is an extension, and there is no one else here except Mrs. Daphne. No matter how hard the girls resisted, they couldn't resist such a delicious basket of baked goods. They rushed to grab the treats, justifying themselves by saying that it was only today and that this was the price for silence. Here, Sioka shared that she mainly works here in the annex, and she rarely gets to cross paths with people from the main palace. And she decided to find out the news by starting a conversation about how Mrs. Flora might just be leaving the main building. The girls looked at each other and smiled. Sioka learned that although she is responsible for Lady Daphne's education, she is not allowed to simply leave the palace building. The girls told her something about Lady Flora other than that she is busy with work. She told this news to her mistress. Daphne was not particularly shocked. She had heard rumors that Flora was in love with her uncle. Sioka guiltily said that these were just rumors. They couldn't know for sure. But Daphne knew that there was some truth in the rumors. Flora's behavior, voice, and look all reveal her feelings for Lias. Sioka agreed thoughtfully, suggesting that unrequited love was probably causing her pain. But our heroine doubted it. Planting dubious recipes on Rivnal is how she shows love. When Daphne stood up resolutely and headed for the door, Sioka screamed. But Daphne assured the maid that she would not act rashly again. Daphne only told how to catch a rat stealing food. For this, you need to show her what she is losing. And to do this, you need to set a mousetrap. Sion approached his wife, asking how she was feeling. The woman replied that, except for a little drowsiness, it was fine. Sion sniffled, barely holding back tears. Rivnal asked why he was crying again, but everything was fine with her. Lovingly placing her hands on her stomach, the woman assured that the baby was also doing well. It hurt her to see him sad because Dad has to stay strong. He agreed. It was time for tea, and Daphne appeared with a tray in her hands. Sion's jaw dropped, and he was at a loss as to what to answer. They hadn't seen each other for so long that the man was completely confused. But Daphne calmed him down. She just came to talk. The girl asked him how he felt about having dinner with the whole family together in the main building. She would like him and her aunt to join too. Having dinner with his brother was something incredible for him. And then Daphne also said that there would be twins. With some disbelief, he asked again that they could really come. But Daphne convinced him that there would be delicious food. Daphne brought tea for her aunt and told her that she hadn't had dinner with her for a long time. She also advised me to undergo tests with another specialist regarding my aunt's condition. Depending on the doctor's conclusion, a different treatment might be prescribed. With a confused look, he replied that she was probably right and stood there for a while until Daphne disappeared. When he returned to his wife, they discussed how Daphne had changed, how friendly and caring she had become. Sion was shocked that on the day of their arrival, she herself offered Rivnal tea and treated him to desserts. The man remembered the last time his niece called him uncle. It was so long ago, when she was still a baby. Rivnal suggested going to dinner. It had been a long time since they had dined like this with the whole family, and the woman expressed hope that not all was lost. When she ran her hand over her husband's face, he burst into tears. The woman sighed. She wanted to make him laugh, not cry. The head maid showed the list to the other maids, stating that these were the nobles who would be attending today's dinner, so they should not lose face. At this time, Flora came out of the carriage, indignant at how they could arrange a reception without her. There have been no banquets held in this house since Eileen died. She wondered if this meant that Lias had taken action to improve his position in society, and this was quite possible given that Xian and his wife returned. And since Rivnal has regained her health, they want to show it to everyone. Of course, her health will only get worse. But Flora was struck by a terrible guess. What if they want to introduce the new mistress of the house? Daphne watched her from the window. The doctor greeted Flora in a fawning voice. Having closed the door, she asked from the threshold if anything serious had happened and if he was following all her instructions. He replied that everything was as she had ordered. He in turn reminded about the case and whether it was progressing. Spencer talked about how he worked adding herbs to Daphne and Rivenel's tea, and if everything goes smoothly, he would like Flora to put in a good word for him as a doctor of the temple. She nodded and tossed him in advance, but she silently called Spencer a fool. How could the doctor of the Peregrine family become a temple doctor? But she considered that he himself was to blame for everything since he believed in such a fable. Flora's maid knocked and entered, out of breath, and announced that the banquet had already begun. Flora screamed, "How could this be? The guests hadn't arrived yet, but the banquet had already been announced." She ran down the corridor as fast as her weight allowed, the sound of her feet echoing through the palace corridor. The guards said they couldn't let her in. As expected, Flora screamed how they could not let Spencer in. The rest of the nobles could be present, but the family doctor could not. But the guards continued to stand as they had been. Flora did not give up so easily. She began to tell who she was and that they could not know her. She was here by order of the imperial palace. When things turned to threats, Daphne appeared and looked at her mentor with an unperturbed expression. Flora stated that she had arrived just in time to complain about the guards who were not letting her into the banquet. Daphne nodded her head to the guards to let them through. The guards bowed and obeyed. Flora walked down the corridor and couldn't believe that everything worked out. While saying thank you to Daphne, she thought that her charge's character had not changed at all. She remained a stupid idiot to this day, but approaching the door and getting ready to open it, Daphne said that the mentor Flora could not enter there. When asked why, the girl replied that the banquet had been cancelled, and since she decided everything in a hurry, it was quite difficult to send out invitations in such a short time. So she decided to have lunch only with her family. And she added that she was sorry that the knights stopped the mentor Flora, but they did it because she was not a member of their family. The woman was confused. What nonsense was this? If one of the nobles had received an invitation from the Peregrine family, they would have dropped everything just to get to the banquet. Flora was struck by lightning. Lias would never have made such a hasty decision. It was impossible. But it looked like all this was Daphne's doing. The woman staggered at Daphne's question about how she even found out about the banquet. It was classified information. Putting her hand on her shoulder, our heroine offered to answer for her. Miss Flora most likely had a spy among the servants, who immediately reported about the banquet as soon as he heard about it. And since Miss Flora had received a reprimand from her uncle, she herself could not enter, so she decided to ask Spencer, since the family doctor had to be let in. Enjoying the scene, the girl laid out everything she knew. They were accomplices with Spencer, who had given her aunt a dangerous potion, so she gave two options. Either they themselves would tell their uncle everything, or Daphne herself promised to personally send them back to the beloved imperial family. Flora was sweating all over from the tension and the way they were opened. She couldn't understand when Daphne had figured everything out, but even despite this, she couldn't just give up on everything after doing so much work. And, taking on the calmest expression possible, Flora replied that it was all nonsense. Where did Daphne get that from? The only thing she admitted was that she took Spencer to go to the banquet. Turning to the doctor, she reproachfully scolded him for giving a pregnant woman a decoction of Job's tears. Spencer, who was on the verge of fainting from horror and panic, screamed how she could pin her crimes on him, and he laid out, almost hysterically, that she herself brought him those seeds so that he could give them to Lady Rivenel to drink so that she would have a miscarriage. The doctor was shaking with indignation that his accomplice had dumped the entire burden on him, and he also laid out what Flora had said about Daphne, for whom the Peregrine estate was too beautiful, and it would be better for her to die. And she ended it all by going over Rivenel's child, who could interfere with the Marquis and the twins in the future, so it would be better if he wasn't born. At that, Daphne, looking at the men, Flora trembled and stuttered as she tried to ask how they ended up there. Like a drowning man, she tried to justify herself by saying that she had been slandered, when the steel of the sword touched her neck. Lias was ready to kill her with his own hands, but warned that if she continued to lie, he would die on this spot. The Count's face spoke louder than words. Then the woman fell to her knees, screaming that she did all this for the Marquis. At that moment, the order was given to lock Flora and Spencer in the dungeon. At that moment, Flora did not yet realize that all this was happening to her now. Lias also said that if they asked the reason in the Imperial Palace, that the attempt on the life of Lady Peregrine and the life of the unborn child. Flora and Spencer were led away by the guards, and while Spencer was simply saying goodbye to his life, Flora was still asking to be listened to in the hope of saving herself. But no one listened to her. Daphne waved goodbye to her, hoping that they would never meet again. Flora, red with anger, hissed Daphne's name as she was led away. Daphne, Laius, and Cian stood in a bit of a daze after their accomplices were taken away. Everything was as Daphne had assumed. Flora was behind everything, both her poisoning and the addition of the dangerous herb Rivnil. Taking a closer look, the girl became frightened. Laius was pale as a sheet and shaking. He realized the full horror of what was happening. Because of him, Daphne and his brother's child almost died. The Count, in a panic, began to shout for a doctor to be brought. Rivnil and her child needed to be checked urgently. Cian tried to calm his brother down. He explained that, thanks to Daphne Rivnil, she had been examined by another doctor, and that both she and the baby were fine. Leah still couldn't understand. Rivnil constantly drank this tea. Then Daphne explained that she gave Rivnil another tea with a similar taste. It contains rice flour, which is absolutely harmless for pregnant women. The men's tears stood as if petrified as they listened to Daphne explaining that Rivnil had not taken tea from the seeds of Job for a long time. Looking at their expressions, she had a feeling that she had done something wrong, until Cian came up and thanked her from the bottom of his heart. He was already close to tears from the overabundance of emotions. Daphne awkwardly apologized that she would like to accept his apology later. He looked up with surprised eyes. She explained that she was very hungry, and, nodding towards the corner from which the twins were peeking out, explained that the children were too. They shouted in one voice that they wanted to eat. The boys looked at their Uncle Xian and asked him why he was crying. And my father's eyes were red, although he tried to quickly turn away. At this time, the Rivnil appeared. Suddenly, Daphne remembered Dark Shadow, how he gave her his hand and helped her down. She learned something from him and ran up to Rivnil and offered her hand to help. The girl was glad with all her heart that she was able to protect this kind woman from the meanness of her enemies. Rivnil gave Daphne her hand with a warm smile and thanked her. Finally, the whole family gathered for dinner. Without delay, Laius Peregrine went to the imperial palace and told what had happened. Emperor Curtison asked how Daphne and her aunt were. The Count said that everything was fine with them now, and the fetus too. But Curtison guessed that Laius was here not only to tell the news, but also about his wife. He said that Laius could decide Flora Charlotte's fate at his own discretion. Laius was seething with anger and asked if His Highness knew to whom Flora was loyal. The Emperor turned pale upon hearing this, realizing where the Duke was heading. He wearily asked what he wanted, and he asked whether Laius was accusing him now, and he replied that the loser is allowed to show his cards first, adding that if he had already wanted to do something, he would have done it. In any case, Peregrine holds the defense. This also requires a lot of patience, and he hopes that His Highness will understand this. When Curtison offered to lift the restrictions on the supply of magical stones from Peregrine territory as compensation, Laius snapped that this would not be enough. He demanded a full investigation into the poisoning at the banquet to see if it was really his niece's fault. The Emperor repeated about a reinvestigation, and Laius added that if Daphne had been believed, then there would have been no need for a reinvestigation. He was ready to do everything to clear Daphne of all suspicion. Curtison jumped up, but the Duke still coldly stated that that incident had brought his niece to the brink of disaster. That's why he insisted on a reinvestigation. The Emperor remained nervously silent. He understood that this was not a case where a reinvestigation was needed. If the mother really had hostile intentions towards Lady Peregrine, then what should he do? Laius understood perfectly well that even if a reinvestigation revealed that the Emperor's mother was involved in the poisoning, the Emperor would still not be able to hold his mother accountable. However, the former Empress would lose her son's most important trust, while Curtison himself said in a tired voice that he had no idea that the Duke cared so much about his family. Laius took his leave and said that in that case he would be heading back to his family. The Emperor was left alone with disturbing thoughts. As Laius walked through the corridors of the palace towards the exit, he met the one he had just accused. The former Empress and her ladies-in-waiting greeted him with an exclamation about how long it had been since they had seen each other. After bowing, he announced that yes, he had had a meeting with His Majesty. He would do everything he could to avoid this meeting and dialogue as quickly as possible. The Empress approached him and anxiously asked why the heart was so pale, and in general, he promised to visit them more often, saying that he would soon be having a tea party. Removing her hand, Laius thanked her and dryly noted that he still had a lot of things to do today. Laius understood perfectly well that the tea party was taking place in the garden, where everything was strikingly different from this place. Since he was invited, then she already understood everything. The Duke had to add that he could not attend the tea party because his father did not like flowers, and he is not a connoisseur either. When he said that besides everything else, his family members were not in the best condition, the ladies-in-waiting exclaimed, "What happened?" Without taking his eyes off the Empress, He said that lately there have been a lot of little monsters wandering around the area. Passing by, he told the Empress that he would personally catch them all. His eyes, full of hatred and contempt for the former Empress, pierced her, and out loud, Laius added that let them just try to harm his family. The Empress remained silent with an imperturbable face. Then, smiling, she referred to the fact that the Duke had been through a lot and apologized for the fact that they had delayed him, and she let him go. The cup shattered at the words that the Duke demanded a reinvestigation. The Empress nervously asked the maid if he had already left. The woman jumped up in a rage and screamed that this bastard Laius Pererin dared to humiliate her while looking her in the eyes. And this man was like 2 peas in a pod with his father, who had humiliated her in her youth by saying that he already had a loved one. He had rejected her then, and now she had a perfect opportunity to ruin Peregrine's reputation. Hela tried to understand when he realized that maybe Flora's actions were too suspicious. Still, she decided that they hadn't heard anything worthwhile from Flora, which is why they demanded a reinvestigation. But Flora told her that something strange had happened, that Daphne had changed a lot in a few days. But then Hela said that there was no need to make a fuss about it. Just keep an eye on Daphne, and that was it. At that time, she believed that this child could still be useful, and Flora set off to carry out the assignment. Now, the former Empress realized with horror that this was not nonsense. Her entire plan, into which she had invested years of hard work, was collapsing. But first, the body had to be hidden. She ordered the maid to call a fallen aristocrat who had received a title but had become addicted to gambling. Lucius read a newspaper which said that there was a reinvestigation and that new evidence had emerged. Although he was not surprised if everything was fabricated from the beginning, he remembered how they called him a villain who needed to be sent to the temple. She put pressure on her son, the Emperor, by manipulating his feelings. Lucius chuckled. His grandmother was quite capable of such a thing. Gale looked at his thoughtful owner. At some point, Lucius flared up. He saw Daphne in the mirror itself, showing who had arrived outside. A satisfied smile played on his face. They hadn't seen each other for quite a long time. The man stood up so abruptly that Gale winced. The seller stopped the gentleman. He asked with hope in his voice that he had to do what they had talked about earlier. It turns out he had to pretend to be the master in front of Lady Gale, but he had no idea how he could pretend like that. Even if the owner changes his facial features, hides his voice, body, face, but character, however, Lucius did not see a problem in this at all. He just needs to go and talk to her. It's not that Lucius couldn't do it himself, but imagining himself as cool and capable somehow embarrassed him, and he will also be embarrassed to hear what impression she got from meeting him. Gale was chosen for this honorable mission. Lucius had arranged a meeting with Daphne in advance to discuss the seller. Gale, who will portray Lucius, will have to calmly tell her his story, insistently emphasizing that the sale is legal since he, the head of the Magic Tower, can avoid any temple supervision and sanctions related to drugs. Dark Shadow believed that everything would go well, but Gale didn't think so. He was shaking and he wasn't ready for this. Descending in the guise of the owner, he once again vowed to himself to quit. Daphne entered and greeted the owner. As she took off her cloak, she couldn't help but notice that something was wrong with Dark Shadow today. He, taut as a string, asked her what she was doing, and Daphne was surprised that he invited her to sit down. The girl decided that they were finally starting to treat her like a client, and Gale was fidgeting, wondering if he had been caught. Daphne put out samples of the improved version, and the first one she had brought in at the beginning. Gale tried to imitate the owner's tone, saying that he had many questions about the effect, then hesitated and became nervous that the owner was saying something wrong. He tried not to look at her while hiding in the hood. Daphne asked him if he was hot, and Gale froze, drenched in sweat. The girl looked closely at him. She couldn't understand what was wrong with the shop owner. He was giggling nervously, wiping himself with a handkerchief, explaining that he had thrown a lot of wood into the stove and was generally behaving extremely strangely. Our heroine looked suspiciously at Dark Shadow, who had a very suspicious face. Gale praised the seller and wanted to quickly end the conversation before she noticed anything. He flinched when Daphne said that she had already found the right person. The owner's face appeared before my eyes, reminding me that everything should go well. With the frightened face of a man who did not want to die, he begged the lady to spare him, cracking that his representative was much better. Pale and drenched in sweat, he realized that he urgently needed to come up with something to make Daphne change her mind. Daphne wanted to ask something, saying that she had recently met someone, His Grace, Duke Lucius. Gale froze at these words. He was about to tell a great story about his master, but the lady herself started talking about him. Gale himself remembered that they had recently met, and how the owner had tried to seduce her. My head was throbbing with the thought of why the conversation had taken a wrong turn. Daphne asked what he knew about the Duke's rare disease, which he had been suffering from for a long time. She suggested that he probably knew much more than she did, and she hoped he would tell her. Gale replied that it was a rare disease for which no cure had been found. The Duke had been suffering since childhood, and the temple had not helped him either. Daphne clarified that. Then it turns out he lived far from his family. The salesman cringed and broke out in a sweat. He couldn't understand why Daphne was asking this and what her goal was. He swallowed and frantically decided that she was trying to figure him out. The tension was growing. He didn't know where to hide from her gaze, which seemed to be scanning him. Realizing that it would be strange if he avoided answering, Gale said that he had heard that the Duke had lived alone for a long time. Having said that this is why the Duke is different from other men, Daphne immediately asked him why exactly. And with all his might, Gale had to live up to the image in order to avoid a cruel fate. Of course, he couldn't admit it, and so he said that Mr. Lucius was immature. He also doesn't know the feeling of affection and love. Daphne felt sad, but she herself knows what affection and love are. Even though Lucius knew who she was, he treated her with great respect, as if there were no problems. It was clear from his face that he was expressing genuine concern. She thought that he was very naive, but this was not so. He cleverly led Roderick around by the finger. As a child, due to a rare disease, he grew up far from his family. The loneliness that had haunted him until these days made him vulnerable to even the slightest signs of affection. Daphne realized how similar they were, because she too had always longed for such love and knew what loneliness was better than anyone. Nobody to herself, our heroine called the Duke limited in time. It was all a rather dark story. As expected here in the potion shop, they know the story of the head of the magic tower. Daphne announced that she had decided to sell potions. Gale, realizing what he had just shouted, his jaw dropped. Trying to rectify the situation, he began to nervously giggle that this guy was Lucius, and he liked him, and that, in general, my lady had excellent taste. He also said that her medications should help him. Gale perked up a little. Everything went better than he expected. Daphne thought it was funny that they were thinking of the same person, but as soon as Gale offered to introduce them, the girl categorically refused. Although she would not have minded if Dark Shadow had introduced them, she believed that Lucius could trust anyone. He was a very naive person, and therefore could not be connected with the Dark Shadow. Our heroine was worried that Dark Shadow would offend Lucius, and even though she had to come here because of the potion, she decided to break off all relations with Lucius and Dark Shadow as soon as the delivery issue was resolved. Now she will have to completely deviate from the original story again. The girl firmly told Gale that he seemed to have forgotten something. She was Daphne Peregrine, a person whom everyone avoided, and if she tells the Duke his name, meaning the Dark Shadow, it might arouse suspicion. He asked how she was going to meet His Highness then, and Daphne replied that it would be by chance, as if they had simply crossed paths, and by some amazing coincidence, she would have the elixir with her at that moment, and that was how she was going to conclude the agreement. She was going to discuss the contract with Dark Shadow later, but as soon as she touched the door handle, she looked back. Gale asked what was the matter and became nervous, and our heroine was surprised that he was not accompanying her today. She attributed it to the fact that he was not feeling well today. Even Dark Shadow can get sick, and offered Gale to drink her medicine. In response to his surprised question, she explained that she saw that he was not feeling well today, but seeing no reaction, she opened the door and said goodbye, and Gale continued to sit, not fully understanding whether he had succeeded or not. Afterwards, he plopped down on the sofa. In the end, he got the last bottle of elixir and settled the contracts. After all, this girl is a very good person. At that moment, the owner crept up and whispered a greeting in Gale's ear. The salesman almost had a heart attack, but Lucius liked to joke like that when he saw the worker's face. Gale himself assumed that the owner would listen to their entire conversation with Daphne, but he answered how he could eavesdrop on a conversation with a lady. Putting on an angelic face, he scolded Gale for not knowing the basic rules of etiquette. Gale got angry, and this was said to him by the man who forces clients to drink the truth potion. But he replied in a businesslike manner that he had obtained the medicine. The lady brought 5 bottles, and marked the last one as the one that Lucius had already taken. He recounted the words of Daphne, who agreed to enter into a contract, but would enter into an exclusive contract after looking at sales. However, Lucius was expecting some more information, wondering what else she was saying. Gale felt awkward. The owner looked a little disappointed, as if he was expecting something, so he blurted out that my lady wanted to sign a contract with him. Lucius corrected himself, more precisely with the Duke, and not with the Dark Shadow, and his face lit up. Gale was shocked. His owner blushed. He had never seen him like this, and he also had such an innocent expression on his face. Lucius chuckled, saying that no matter how strong an opponent he was, Before meeting the lady, there was blood on his hands, and with a carefree look, he opened the door. When Gale asked where he was going, Lucius answered that he wanted to see my lady. She was waiting on the first floor. Gale had to disappoint the owner by informing him that Lady Daphne did not want to enter into an agreement through the dark shadow. Lucius seemed to be amused by this and smiled radiantly. Fidgeting, Gale had to admit that Lady Daphne had already left their store. This news threw the owner off balance. His eyes filled with disappointment mixed with anger. Gale suggested that the owner look at the drug samples first. After all, if everything goes well and he finds out the ingredients, then he won't have to worry about Milady anymore. Although Lucius didn't really want to test the samples now, he started by taking the bottle that was the best sample. He swallowed the contents in one gulp. The man laughed and explained to Gale that Daphne had changed the ingredients and concentration to reduce the effectiveness. He appreciated her intelligence. No matter how much he asked, she did not want to give 5 bottles of real medicine to someone with whom she had not yet signed a contract. The owner smiled softly and blushed, saying, "Well, how can you not worry about this now?" According to rumors, she was portrayed as a stupid villain, but he saw how kind and smart this girl was. Take the same candies that she made herself and directly treated him to in the guise of the tower's owner. Therefore, he was not surprised that he quite naturally became interested in this man. Only he was a little upset that only he was interested in my lady. He would like her to be interested too, and having taken the form of Lucius, he, delighted by his beauty, decided that no one could resist this face. All that remains is to choose a place where they will supposedly meet by chance. Daphne went to have a bite to eat at the pastry shop, and only now realized how and where she could completely accidentally meet the Duke. She came to the bakery that both Lucius and Darkshadow recommended to her, which was even surprising. The girl began to try desserts that promised to be delicious. While she was eating, she overheard a conversation between 3 girls who were discussing Duke Lucius, who often came here. The girls admired his angelic beauty. Daphne realized that Lucius was quite popular among the ladies, but I didn't find anything surprising about this, with such a striking appearance. Meanwhile, the gossips began to discuss an article in the newspaper and some event. One of the girls spoke about the terrible act of Lady Flora, and after all, she served in the temple. How could she commit poisoning? But the other noted that most likely she, as Lady Peregrine's mentor, simply took the blame upon herself. Our heroine was shocked at how she was slandered again. They are trying to denigrate her and make her look bad, when her reputation is already worse than ever. At that moment, a wind came out of nowhere and blew everything off the gossip table. Daphne wondered where such a rush came from, since there was complete calm here. She also smelled a sweet aroma, and a familiar voice asked how she liked the coffee. Lucius greeted and smiled charmingly. The girl was amazed. She simply did not expect to meet him so soon, and almost shouted at the Duke when he laughingly asked her to be silent. At this, Daphne, she was shocked by the fact that the middle name is usually used by relatives or friends, as well as lovers. Is it possible to address him like that? She remembered the master, Darkshadow, who called the Duke a little immature. It turns out that, despite the fact that they barely know each other, she must address him simply by his first name, and our heroine asked him to forgive her. This angel in the flesh confirmed that she should simply call him Rose. Daphne noted that he had become even more handsome since the last time they saw each other, and, ashamed of her thoughts, decided to adopt a businesslike tone. But her heart ached from his slightly sad voice that the weather was so wonderful and he hadn't been out for a long time. Daphne decided that he must have been feeling so bad. With the look of a frustrated child, he noted that all the seats were taken. Apparently, he needed to arrive earlier. Our heroine realized that she had an opportunity to invite him and offered to sit down with her. With a smile, she confirmed her proposal, silently saying that he should join. Without noticing, she began to coquettishly adjust her hair and talk nonsense about the weather, that in such weather a cup of tea is just what you need. She had to sit in the salon for 4 hours to get her hair done. This guy definitely has some effect on her. His smile makes her lose control. Lucius joined in and began to drink tea. Observing him, the girl noted that outwardly he looked quite healthy, but here was his magical disease. All that was left was to tell him about the elixirs. But she felt such guilt in her soul that she wanted to enter into a contract with such an innocent person. While the girl was thinking what to do, Rose began to cough. Our heroine felt more and more anxious. The attack did not stop, and a frightened Daphne jumped up and tried to help him. The man covered his mouth with his hand and could not answer. She was genuinely worried, asking him if he was in a lot of pain and how she could help. He apologized for the sudden attack, but he had a stabilizer with him. Daphne, mesmerized by his appearance, asked herself why he looked so sexy even in this state. after which she started yelling at herself about how one could think about all sorts of obscene things when a person is feeling bad. Daphne was so lost in thought that the Duke had already called her several times. With a sad face, Lucius complained that the imperial medicines were not helping him. He heard that they are very good. But in fact, this is not so. This is how it all turned out. Having made a business proposal, she wants to help Lucius. So the girl carefully said that she was embarrassed to say such a thing to the owner of the magic tower, but she knows how to prepare medicine. Taking out the bottle, she said that it might be difficult for him to trust a stranger, but her medicines were much more effective than he thought. To her surprise, he immediately asked her to try it. She was once again amazed at why he believed her so easily. And what if there was poison? So with excitement in her voice, the girl thanked him for such trust, but she had to explain about the side effects. Lucius, Daphne, what was she supposed to do if he died at this rate? Fearing that he would die, the girl took out a bottle and gave it to him, telling him to drink it all, and that if he felt strange, he should tell her right away. The Duke drank it all in one gulp, after which he closed his eyes as if trying to feel his state. He was silent and did not move. Daphne, in a panic, asked him to tell her how he felt. Lucius tried to explain his feelings. A frightened Daphne asked him to forgive her in advance. Lucius was tense and didn't know how to speak. Suddenly, Daphne leaned towards him and touched his forehead. Her face was so close, the girl said that there was no fever. But she couldn't understand why his face turned red. She tried to ask him if he felt dizzy or nauseous, but Lucius couldn't take his eyes off her and blushed more and more, falling into new, unknown sensations for him. Daphne herself was beside herself. Apparently his temperature had risen. What if it was a side effect? She scolded herself that she shouldn't have given him the medicine like that. What if his body didn't accept it? She turned around sharply and wanted to go for help. He stopped her by taking the end of her sleeve, quietly saying that he was simply surprised. And for some reason, the temperature rose on its own. Daphne breathed a sigh of relief. She had already started to panic, and in her mind, she decided that she would be arrested for the murder of a member of the royal family. But she warned the Duke that no matter how good the medicine was, it could become poison if not absorbed. Everything was going great, and it was necessary to somehow keep the conversation going, and she admitted that she actually came to this bakery to meet him and to offer him something. Lucius made a very surprised and shocked face, and Daphne said that she knew that he had been suffering from a serious illness for a long time. Fortunately, her medicine helped, and if he doesn't mind, she will continue to supply him with medication. And if it is inconvenient for him to meet in person, she can give him the recipe. When Lucius languidly lowered his eyes in gratitude, and a blush appeared on his snow-white skin, Daphne could not help but admire his beauty. But to her regret, this was all she could do for him. Of course, the girl felt some guilt. Where else could she have found such a model to test the effectiveness of the medicine? But since the rumors about it were exaggerated, it would be difficult to believe. That's why Daphne said that he also helped her in difficult times, and therefore she wants to thank him. Without raising his eyes, the man nodded that he understood everything. At that moment, Daphne, her eyes shining, folded her hands in prayer and asked him to take care of her. When Lucius looked up and smiled at her, our heroine rejoiced. She sold the medicine to the head of the magic tower despite her reputation. Yes, she is a sales genius. Lucius asked that he was really glad and wanted to know how else he could help her. Daphne, he couldn't help but smile, admiring this lady, so sweet. And this thought made Lucius shudder. He now considered this girl cute. I immediately thought of the heroes of Gale's novels. Didn't they throw around phrases like these? They seemed so sickeningly cloying and unreal to the head of the magic tower. It became scary that the same thoughts were now running through his head. Then Daphne spoke up, saying that she would like to open her own salon. Lucius remembered that she had wanted to sell drugs privately, and now she was talking about a salon. Even though she had already been found not guilty, there would still be difficulties finding employees who would want to work with her. He understood that even if she opened a salon, there would still be no clients. So what was she planning? And Daphne began to explain her business plan. There are a lot of salons in their country, and she knows this. And she also knows that people will react negatively to this idea. However, the Empire's discerning consumers don't like ordinary things, which is why she would like to invest her unique skills in this salon. Daphne planned to call it the Healing Salon, explaining her choice by the fact that recently, the inhabitants of the Empire had become increasingly anxious. And this was due to the departure of the Crown Prince to fight monsters. And if at such a time she opens a salon where they treat the soul and body while mentioning a goddess from myths, there will be a violent reaction. The girl asked Lucius to imagine a mansion where music was playing and people were quietly sipping tea. A person can go to a separate room where he can get a massage and undergo relaxation therapy. The name of the Healing and Therapy Cafe immediately appeared, and the most important thing in therapy, according to Daphne, was a warm and soft bed. A warm bed was a plus in the previous life, but in this one, the bed was simply ice cold, and it was difficult to heat the bed and keep it warm for a long time. That's when Daphne thought about the electric blanket from her past life. In her country, this was a very necessary thing in winter. It is also a popular method used in Eastern medicine. People use electric blankets for good sleep and relief from fatigue, regardless of age. And if she creates something like this in this world, it will be impossible to pass by the salon. Ladies will be able to purchase a bed separately. They would be able to sign up for a specific day. Daphne had already seen what success this promised. Moreover, if she also sells the medicines she makes for fatigue, swelling, and other ailments, the salon will be even more successful. In addition, she planned to introduce so-called individual membership for regular customers who want a special service. If it provides privacy and a personalized approach to each client, they will not be able to get such a unique experience anywhere else. In other words, Daphne called it hitting the jackpot. That's why she needed a good fire mage who could fill a large, flat magic stone with mana, after which she would place it on the bed. Then she would need several of these palm-sized devices. That's why she needed Lucius, whom she now turned to as Rose for magical help. However, the mages from the Magic Tower have their own reputation, so labor costs will be much higher than when cooperating with other wizards. Moreover, a fire mage will be very expensive due to its effectiveness and very high demand. Therefore, Lucius said that although he is the head of the Magic Tower, it is difficult for him to help in this matter. But then Daphne reassured him about the price if they sell these magic stones in countries where it constantly snows. Or if there is a strong coastal wind, then they can make a huge profit. And if he succeeds in making small and lightweight artifacts that can be easily attached to clothing, then he will also be able to increase sales. Daphne predicted that every year the capital's aristocrats will come to buy their magical instruments. Therefore, her plan will not cause any harm to the Magic Tower. She also asked him to sell her medicines under his name, and the girl voiced the entire business project as something that, given her reputation as a seller, would be impossible to find. So she would only lend his name for a while, after which she would be able to return him a multiplied share of the profits. Our heroine also emphasized that if he listens to her, they will sign an additional agreement. Regardless of whether the medicine she gave him today receives a response from the audience after sales, until the business stabilizes, she will sell the drugs exclusively under the name Rose. Lucius's face expressed extreme astonishment. He couldn't even find what to answer right away. The girl waited for an answer, but Lucius was thinking about the bottle of medicine. Daphne herself was delighted with the speech she gave. He promised help, and the girl considered him a real angel. Lucius asked where my lady planned to open a salon, but Daphne didn't know yet. After thinking for a bit, she said that it was possible in an area famous for its health resorts. The girl thought it would be nice to live a life that would be different from her original story. While she was lost in her thoughts, Lucius's voice brought her to her senses. His red eyes pierced Daphne, and he asked if she was going to go there. There was silence for a while. The girl refuted his doubts, although she noted to herself that she needed to settle down somewhere. But first, she had a lot of work to do. The man sighed with relief, and a gentle smile lit up his face. Daphne realized that he was worried about her going into business herself, but if she revealed her identity, it would obviously negatively impact sales. Our heroine wondered where she could find a manager. Would anyone want to work with the infamous Lady Peregrine? When he said it out loud, the girl shuddered, deciding that he had clearly read it on her face. Daphne said that the position is responsible, so it should be filled by a trusted person. First of all, if they find out that the woman is possessive, this could lead to ignoring or interference in her affairs. And she doesn't need any romantic advances either. Secondly, if absurd complaints are received, it is important to have a person with such an appearance that he cannot be ignored. And our heroine stated that she would like to have a man as a manager, and preferably a larger one. She has already drawn an image of such a candidate. And Lucius had his own plan. He already knew which candidate to propose, who, according to rumors, would quit the job he had worked at for many years. And since he has a large build, it is not easy for him to find a new job. Daphne did not believe in such a stunning success. The girl married him emotionally. This guy won't care that the company is just starting out. Lucius is confident that this guy will do whatever she asks. Despite the fact that the guy is quite timid, he adapts well and has good endurance. At that moment, Gale didn't understand why he felt sick and had goosebumps. It was time to go to the estate, and Daphne looked at the display case with sweets. Aunt Rivnal likes these desserts, so she decided to buy some. The young people entered the pastry shop. Daphne believed that despite the dark side, people here were not deprived of good manners, which could lead to confusion. They were met by a polite salesperson who bowed and asked them to choose a dessert. It would be packaged immediately. If help was needed, he would always help. When Daphne asked to wrap it up to take away, she didn't understand why the seller was looking at her as if scanning her, after which he simply ignored her and moved on. It's all because Daphne came in a simple outfit so as not to attract attention to herself, but it seems they simply decided to ignore her. The seller mockingly said that she needs to think to make a choice, but it seems that it will take time to think. They have an expensive establishment, hinting that everything here is clearly beyond her means. Our heroine became increasingly angry when the seller recommended desserts baked yesterday. They tasted no different, but were much cheaper. The girl began to prove that everything was fine, but shuddered at the mention of Roderick behind her back. And why did they need to meet here? One of the friends said that Liz was here on behalf of Daphne, but Count Evans claims that she was saved by holy water from the temple. The salesman listened actively to the girl's gossip, having completely erased Daphne from his sight. He heard the golden client and began to court the rich customer. Liz was telling her what to wrap up, telling her friends that she had spent several days in bed and now she wanted something sweet. The salesman tried his best to please her and nodded in agreement, and Liz herself threw her handbag to her friend as if she were her personal servant. She explained her gesture by saying that her hands hurt. Liz and her friends were talking loudly about Daphne and her probation period and how unhappy her family was to have such a useless daughter. Lucius looked with regret at Daphne, who heard everything. Our heroine could barely contain herself, but she understood that if this had been the real Daphne from the novel, she would have run up long ago and grabbed this scoundrel by the hair. But she's not that Daphne. She'll just wait until Liz leaves and buy her aunt some desserts. She won't attract attention to herself, but loud gossip about her continued. Liz said that if they were in her family's place, they would have excluded Daphne from the family register altogether and wouldn't have given her any probationary periods. Her friends still considered these words too cruel. After all, the probationary period is indefinite. Daphne is not visible anyway, but Liz objected. She almost died because of Daphne Peregrine. She said sullenly that she was very upset when her father closed the case without giving her a chance to protest, and because when he returned, he would raise the issue again. Daphne, the girl's nerves couldn't take it anymore. Who does this Liz think she is? And her hand reached for the plates. If she dared to speak so carelessly about her family, she would not leave it like that, and the plate crashed to the floor. Everyone turned towards Daphne. Daphne, walking on the shards, said that their conversation seemed funny to her, so she decided to attract attention to herself, but apparently it turned out too loud. Liz blushed with indignation, asking Daphne who she was that she dared to speak to her so rudely. With a light, magical click, Lucius blew the wind and the hood flew off Daphne's head. The girls' faces became as if they had seen a resurrected dead man, and the seller simply fell to his knees with a plate in his hands, his face showing farewell to life. Everyone looked at Lady Peregrine in horror. Daphne herself did not expect that the wind would blow so effectively and everyone would discover her, just like in the TV series in her world. But she appreciated the effectiveness of her appearance, and therefore greeted Lady Caparowel decisively and with a smile. There was no turning back, so Daphne decided to get even with the gossip in full. Liz and her friends looked down in shame, while the instigator herself babbled that she didn't know that Lady Peregrine would also be here. Our heroine sarcastically responded that this was completely natural, because if they knew and still spoke out loud about the ducal family, it would be comparable to suicide. Liz was nervous, but at the same time, she tried to maintain her dignity. So she apologized for her rude words, but noted that she did not think that she had expressed herself in any way incorrectly. She burst into tears as if she were on a theater stage and insisted that there was nothing between her and Sir Roderick, but Lady Peregrine did not believe her and poisoned her. Daphne realized how perfectly she had arranged everything. Liz whined, causing everyone to feel sorry for her. But Daphne also decided not to give up, because she could also find a loophole, and said that she was sorry that Lady Liz suffered because of the poison. Our heroine asked if Liz hadn't recovered from the poison, to which Lady Caparel began to whine even more loudly, declaring that her whole body still hurt, her teeth hurt, and her head was splitting. Daphne glanced at the desserts held by the salesman, who was speechless with horror in front of Daphne and this showdown. The girl pointed to the desserts Liz had chosen, clarifying that these desserts were hard for bad teeth. Liz was clearly nervous and shouted that it was a gift for her family and she was not going to eat them. Daphne triumphantly said that then it was an even bigger problem and she had been deceived. Of course, Liz did not understand what the deception was.
Daphne glared at her pale friend Liz and reminded her that didn't she say that Lady Liz was saved by Mr. Evans? The same one who handed over the holy water from the temple.
That is, it was Roderick, according to these words, who brought holy water from the temple and saved Liz. The pale girl began to make excuses. She only said what she heard.
Daphne asked questioningly whether this was true.
But holy water is a very valuable resource that even members of the imperial family cannot obtain. So if Liz did not feel better after drinking it, Daphne repeated once again about the deception.
Or maybe it wasn't her,
but Mr. Evans who was deceived, while Liz stood there not knowing where to hide her eyes, muttering that she didn't mean it that way.
Cornered,
Liz did nothing better than attack her friends, saying that when she said such things about holy water, she only let it slip that Mr. Evans had done everything in his power to save her.
The girls' eyes widened,
and they confirmed that Lady Caparel was saying that. They had personally heard her say that Mr. Evans had given her holy water, and then it dawned on the girl. How did Liz recover without holy water? Liz's father, the Marquis Caparel, definitely said that she was on the verge of death due to poison. Daphne even remembered this news on the front page of the newspaper. Therefore, the Peregrine family accepted Flora into their home, not daring to disobey the Emperor's decree, and paid a huge compensation. But Liz, who was now standing in front of Daphne, looked great for someone who had drunk poison. Daphne began to doubt more and more whether Liz had actually drunk poison. Meanwhile, Liz was still screaming, proving that when did she say such words? Finally, she turned to Daphne and, smiling tensely, apologized that there had simply been some kind of misunderstanding.
Liz blushed when Daphne said that she always distorted information,
which is why the ladies didn't understand her correctly. Our heroine was already in high spirits. She understood Liz's move and decided that if she insisted on her own way, she would get away with everything. But Daphne could not forgive those words about the family registry, so she just enjoyed it when she kept asking Liz if she had anything else to say. She could barely restrain herself and tried to say that she was a little unrestrained in her statements when she mentioned the registry of the ducal family, and she was very sorry. What happened next shocked her friends. The Marquise snatched the handbag and gave it to her friend, and she rushed out of the pastry shop with the speed of the wind. The girls shouted indignantly after her. How could she leave alone and abandon them? Besides, they still had something to say. Watching them, Daphne was once again convinced that high society is scary, but she liked the way she handled the situation. While she was thinking about this, people, pushing and shouting, "She's going to kill us now!" ran out of the building faster. Only she and Lucius remained. And then Daphne wondered if her villainous effect was really that incredible, or if she just had that murderous expression on her face. The seller also wanted to escape in the noise, but was captured by Lucius. The guy yelled that he didn't know that they were aristocrats. Lucius himself turned to Daphne with a beaming, victorious smile. Isn't he a good guy? Our heroine could only smile, noting how handsome Lucius's face was, although it didn't suit the one who had roughly grabbed the other by the wrist. They were deciding what to do with him, the girl was thinking out loud. Not only is the seller rude to customers, but instead of apologizing, he is going to run away. When she said that the manager of this store was very disappointing, the head of the magic tower squeezed his hand with such force that the seller squealed. Lucius agreed with this and chuckled devilishly. The seller stared in silent horror at the hitherto handsome face of the one who had been holding him back. Lucius, with obvious pleasure, twisted the unfortunate man's arm so that he could barely stand, promising Daphne not to worry, as new staff would arrive soon. The cook jumped out at the noise, shouting why there was so much noise and where all the customers had gone. Daphne immediately asked if he was the owner of this bakery. The man replied that yes, he was the boss here, and seeing his employee, he realized that he was causing inconvenience. He bowed politely to Daphne, apologizing for the negligent employee. The girl wanted to argue with her superiors, but realized that the problem was only with this employee. Our heroine was pondering what to do next, in accordance with her status as a villain, but on the other hand, all the customers had left, and she did break the plate. Daphne decided to show kindness to the person whose sales had fallen, and she explained that she tried to place an order, but the employee was rude to her. The boss asked if she could then place an order with him, and the girl nodded and pointed to the display case. It was from there that the most expensive desserts were displayed. She ordered everything to be packed and sent to the Peregrine estate. With these words, she horrified the cook, and the seller could barely stand on his feet from fear. The cook took his leave and promised that everything would be done. And Daphne herself said goodbye to Rose as she left. Still bending over, the cook clearly heard her call Rose's name. Lucius lifted his hood to show who he was. The cook looked guilty and mumbled that he had made a mistake. While the chef began to teach the employee manners, Daphne took Lucius by the hand and led him out of the pastry shop, saying that they didn't need to listen to this. Lucius's face was incredibly sweet. He looked down, and his face was covered in a blush from the fact that Daphne was holding his hand. To society, he was an abandoned member of the imperial family, a Grand Duke and the master of a magic tower. But in the dark world, the owner of the illegal store is Isles, and the actual owner of the bakery is Rose. Now the question is, why does he own a bakery that is of no interest to him? It's very simple, because the aristocrats who come here are sources for collecting information. That is why such an attitude of employees towards the non-target audience is rude, but quite justified if we take into account the ultimate goal. In any case, this girl was able to shut the mouths of all the rude people at once and stop the actions of the ladies and employees. And once again, Lucius was amazed at how unusual this girl was. They walked in silence, Daphne in front, Lucius with a searching gaze behind. At some point, Lucius stopped, surprised to find that they had already reached the carriage. Daphne apologized for getting His Highness into trouble. He must have been very surprised. The man only intelligently refuted her thoughts. It was he who should apologize, but she, smiling charmingly, noticed how he had already helped her a lot by detaining the employee who wanted to escape. He looked at his hand in surprise, as if it was not him but someone else. But Lucius was struck by the fact that he touched someone. Looking back, he grabbed the lady's fiancé's hand. What he dislikes most is being touched, but after meeting her, he does things that are completely unlike him. Moreover, when he touched at that moment, he was unable to feel the emotions of those people. Lucius, a little hesitantly, still under the influence of reflection, asked that the lady was pleased with his actions. Daphne responded like a mother to her young son, that the opponent could be stronger and more dangerous, and that His Highness was too valuable, and she silently added that he also had a weak body. The girl continued to teach him never to take risks on the street, especially if he was alone. The man's mood changed. He realized that Daphne saw him as some kind of pathetic sociophobe, looking at him like a hothouse flower. He didn't feel any romantic feelings from her, although before that, he thought that she was experiencing at least some attraction. But he became sad that there was no return at all. The corners of his lips curled down in disappointment. He remained the only interested participant. It was too unfair to part like this, and he called out to Daphne, who was already leaving. Lucius put on a pitiful expression and apologized for upsetting her with his actions. Of course, she began to convince him that he had not done so at all. The man decided that perhaps she hadn't seen his face very well because of the hood. So a light gust of wind blew the hood off, and, like an angel in the flesh, he languidly promised to do the same next time, even if he looked like a fool. With eyes that pierced the soul, he quietly whispered why he didn't know so much about this world. The facial attack did not go unnoticed. Daphne promised to teach him all the standards of communication. She will talk about them so often until he understands everything. Lucius barely heard what she was saying because, having forgotten about his effect, he couldn't take his eyes off her face. Her carriage had already pulled up, and Lucius's heart was pounding in his chest. He realized that upon his return he would have to read Gale's stupid novels. Previously, he ignored these stupid stories, but perhaps in them he will find answers regarding his condition. He saw Daphne off, and when she sat down, she said goodbye with wishes to see her soon. And he stood there with what seemed like a stupid expression on his face, unable to tear his gaze away from her eyes and smile, but confident that he could find answers to this ridiculous feeling. Lucius looked into the distance at the departing carriage, attracting the attention of passers-by with his appearance. Then he took out the red crystal through which he maintained contact with Gale and called Io. He asked what had happened, and Lucius ordered that the best-selling romance novels that he had praised so much be prepared. At first, he answered automatically, but when he realized that the owner was asking him to prepare romance novels, he screamed, and also learned that his wish had come true and he was changing jobs. And this was not just a job, but the best one could only dream of. Gale's sensitive nature was unable to cope with such a flood of news at once. He shrank completely, not understanding what was happening. It seemed like the world had turned upside down. Meanwhile, at the Duchy of Evans, Roderick listened to a report on the latest gossip about Daphne's quarrel with Lady Caparel. The servant explained that, according to rumors, Lady Caparel had behaved rudely towards Lady Daphne. With a satisfied sigh, as if it was because of me again, he asked if there was any other news. When he heard that the matter concerned the holy water that Sir Roderick allegedly gave to Lady Caparel, and that she also spoke about excluding Lady Daphne from the family register, the man turned pale. Roderick was horrified that he was not the cause of the quarrel, because Daphne was the woman who knew nothing but him. Could it really be that she had fallen out of love with him? His face twisted from hurt vanity. Yes, he wanted Daphne to leave him alone. But then why was he so upset? If everything continued like this, she would leave him. And then he ordered the servant to bring him all the holy relics from the black market, which would open in a few days. The servant reminded him that the sum would be enormous, but Roderick barked in rage that he was not going to follow his orders. Of course, he didn't like that he would have to use the black market, but Daphne would definitely be smitten. She wouldn't be able to resist these relics. He would return Daphne, and only then would he feel better. About a week has passed since then. All this time, our heroine was busy with the greenhouse and herbal infusions. I also monitored the twins' educational process, so I was very busy. Of course, and this was already the umpteenth time that week that the estate was overgrown with all sorts of desserts. Today, they sent even more sweets. It seems that the boss was very worried about what happened. Daphne had no reason to refuse. She felt sorry for such a kind owner. She accepted everything, but there were so many sweets that she and her family could not eat it all. Therefore, they were able to enjoy the desserts, and Daphne's spirits were lifted. Suddenly, Daphne's gaze fell on Shioka, who sadly looked down, lost in thought about something. She offered the girl to eat whatever she wanted. She explained that she didn't want to. She was just thinking about her brothers and sisters. Daphne knew that Shioki's family was poor, so they could never afford such luxurious desserts. The maid, having forgotten everything, dreamily shared how wonderful it would be to eat all of this with her family. Our heroine looked at this girl with respect because she had to work at such a young age, but she continues to think about her family even in such a situation. Shioka was very helpful to her when mixing medicinal herbs, and Daphne decided, why not give her a gift? She said that Shioka is a maid working for her and should not think about such things. And she winked at the maid and asked her to wait a few days. She would send much more luxurious desserts to her home. Shioka thought she would lose consciousness from the overwhelming emotions. She couldn't believe that her mistress was doing this for a maid like her. The girl began to bow and assure that she would work even harder in the future. No matter how much of a villain Daphne was, she thought that caring about her people was normal. At that moment, the twins ran in and rushed to hug her. They came to drink tea with their sister, asking permission to sit next to her. The argument about who would sit next to her sister started again. Daphne said that they could sit on either side of her. Her aunt and uncle came in, apologizing for the noise. The children simply really wanted to see her. Cian and Rivnal also asked permission to have tea with her. Daphne told Sioke to bring more chairs. It was a typical warm and happy day for the Perrin family. The whole family gathered. It was fun and lively. Our heroine was glad that such gatherings had now become natural for her family. I really wanted to believe that such peaceful days would continue in the future. At this time, a servant entered who was clearly nervous. He didn't know the details, but he conveyed the words of Duke Laios for the whole family to gather. Laios waited for the family to gather. Rivnal and Cian stared at Laios expectantly. Daphne and the boys were also tensely awaiting news. Our heroine was worried that the news would be bad since her uncle looked so depressed. The first thing that came to mind was that the imperial family was threatening the House of Perrin. Instead of answering, the Duke handed Daphne a newspaper. The girl took the newspaper. Julius and Hermano also looked at her with concern. It turned out that the front page was full of the news that Lady Peregrine's suicide attempt turned out to be a murder attempt, with Flora Charlotteel as the culprit. In addition, the article stated that the real culprit of the poisoning at the Empress's banquet was Russell Monserish, the motive for the crime being unrequited love for Lady Caparel. In light of these events, the Imperial Palace intends to send an official letter of apology to Lady Daphne. Daphne still couldn't believe it as she reread the newslines. It turned out her name had been cleared. Aunt Rivnal couldn't contain her joyful emotions. The twins were also rejoicing that it turned out their sister was a hero. The girl looked at the boys with a smile, jokingly remembering that they once called her a witch. Sean spoke up, asking his older brother if he had gathered them for this news. Leas confirmed, but Cian explained that this could have been said at dinner. When he called them all here, they were afraid that the news was bad. Daphne realized that her uncle was still awkward in such moments, but the most important thing is that nothing bad happened. Everything happened like in a dream. She grabbed Flora herself, but she didn't expect that everything would be resolved so quickly. She watched her uncle's expression and realized that it couldn't have happened without him. He was clearly threatening the imperial family. Although after a minute, I discarded this assumption. My uncle doesn't have that much free time, and besides, he wouldn't do this for the sake of his problematic niece. Afterwards, a peaceful conversation reigned, and the tension subsided. Thanks to this, Daphne's heroine no longer goes down the villainous path of poisoning as she did in the original. Since the threat has disappeared, the likelihood that her fate will turn out as in the original story has decreased. From now on, it's just worth staying away from the main characters. Now she needs to focus on business, which is why she decided that now is the right time to tell her family.
Everyone was startled by her news that she wanted to go to the countryside for a while.
Even though the charges were dropped, people would still be suspicious of her, so it was better to stay in the shadows for a while. Laius was not thrilled, and before he could say anything, Daphne explained that they needed to meet with the Duke to have the engagement documents sealed. Everyone knew that when it was necessary to break off an engagement while being a resident of this empire, the seal of both families was required. However, currently the head of the Peregrine family is Duke Cheddon Peregrine. He lives in a place called Regartha with clean air and water. He will not come to the capital. It is there that the main character Maria will provide medical services. In the past, Cheddon's daughter and Daphne's mother Amelia Peregrine also went there for treatment, so Daphne decided to go to a sanatorium. It perfectly suits the direction of her business. There simply isn't a more suitable place. Our heroine's plan was to get a stamp on the documents about the break in the engagement, and at the same time analyze the market, so to speak. Kill two birds with one stone. Laius was very serious. Breaking off the engagement with Roderick was necessary to get rid of him. The children immediately wanted to go with her. Stroking the boys on the head, she patiently explained that they couldn't be together all their lives. She wouldn't be for long, and they would wait for her at home for now. Then the boys shouted that they would help with the preparations, and the uncle declared that it was necessary to organize a gathering of knights. Daphne protested. She didn't need knights. She would only take her maid Shioka. However, Herzog Peregrine stated that the road was long and without protection. Uncle sat gloomier than a thundercloud. Sheehan and Rivnal were also worried. Daphne understood that this was expected, but she did not think that the reaction would be so violent. In case anything happened, Daphne wanted to keep a safety device on hand. Laius looked at his niece with concern on his face. The girl also wanted to end this tension as quickly as possible. She looked at her watch and stood up. The boys immediately jumped up, asking where their sister was going. Laius, still frowning, asked where she was going, to which Daphne replied that she had plans for the evening, but her uncle clarified that they were so important that she would not have dinner with them. She explained that I needed to pick up an order from their bakery, promising that there wouldn't be any fuss like last time. The girl said that she also wanted to get some fresh air, to which Laius replied that she could get some fresh air in Peregrine's garden. Uncle asked a logical question. If she says she wants to go into the shadows, then why does she constantly disappear somewhere? Looking away with a faded gaze, he quietly told her that she was not uncomfortable with them for an hour. Daphne was taken aback. Could he really be upset and she was the reason? She hastened to assure that of course not. The girl gave the reason that since she was falsely accused, she could not really leave the estate, and therefore, before leaving the city, she wanted to visit the local cafes and bakeries. The whole family looked at her with suspicion. Finally, Laius breathed a sigh of relief. Daphne thanked him for his understanding. And Rivnal gasped, telling them how Daphne smiled when she saw that they were worried about her, and how she wasn't at all worried about the broken engagement, and when that child had time to grow up so much. Here Laius barked to call the best confectioners of the empire. He had to do something for the child who cared so much about his family. The servant reacted in an instant and ran to carry out the order. He ran to call the best confectioners, and Daphne went to the city. At this time, Lucius was reading Gale's romance novels. Gale spun in front of the mirror, still not understanding how it happened that he was now working for Lady Peregrine. The man reassured himself that, contrary to rumors, she seemed like a kind girl, but it was still irritating that the owner continued to act without warning. The assistant quietly walked around to see what the owner was reading with such a serious face. Seeing that it was one of his favorite novels, Gale, with ardor in his eyes, offered Lucius a napkin, since there were so many touching moments in it. Lucius sat with a stony face, watching as Gale almost tearfully praised this diamond story. Finally, he asked Gale. He was curious to know something. He didn't understand these strange characters in the novel, especially the main character. Why didn't the main character, if he was so in love with the main character, express his feelings in any way? In general, I asked her to come back a bit late, although I should have done it a long time ago. The novel's main admirer was clearly confused by such dry facts. Gale scratched the back of his head, not knowing how to respond to his boss's statement regarding the now main character. He didn't understand her motives. If she had no feelings and decided to leave, then why did she care so much about this man? The assistant answered because the main character still loves this man, to which Lucius objected that she said no, why her words do not match her actions. Gale wiped away a tear from the memories of the novel The Taste of Regret. It was all hard to explain. This is the taste of regret. He explained that the main characters came together and separated until they realized the feelings they didn't even suspect, and saw Lucius's face in front of him, who clearly didn't understand a word. Gale was also struck by the owner's comment, who pointed to the description of the place where the main characters had a child. He sincerely did not understand why, when the characters finally found happiness, they decided to have a child. Wasn't the man jealous? He commented thoughtfully that from the main character's point of view, she now had another loved one, and this, in his opinion, was an obvious rivalry. So, can she claim that she loves him? Gale didn't know what to answer from these statements, looking at his owner with regret. The assistant did not know how to explain this to the gentleman, although he felt sorry for him as a human being. The owner grew up in an unfavorable environment since childhood, not to mention the fact that he never saw love between a man and a woman. Lucius did not understand that a child must be loved and cherished without reservation. Even if Gale explained it in simple words, the owner still wouldn't be able to understand. The owner exhaled that human feelings were so confused as if he wasn't human. Gale tried to find out if he felt something. Lucius said that his fingertips were numb. He noticed something similar in the novel that the main character experienced, so he shared her fate, Lucius thought, trying to put himself in her place. The owner of the magic tower knew what it was like when you like a person, but he is indifferent to you. While he was reading, he thought his heart would explode, after which he remembered that it was time for Gale to move out. Lucius thought it was good that when Daphne entered the store for the first time, she did not see Gale's face. He was standing in a dark corner. He admonished his assistant that if he does not know what to say, then let him tell the truth. Just when Gale was glad that his owner supported him, he heard that if he couldn't cope, he might not return. Lucius couldn't resist playing a prank on the gullible Gale. The coffee shop was noisy. Whispers and voices could be heard. Gale sat tense while Daphne calmly asked what she had heard from His Highness about Gale previously working in a branch of the magic tower. The girl clarified that she heard that he gave permission to enter and exit, but she wanted to know what exactly he was doing. The man plucked up his courage and replied that he was simply standing at the entrance, and when customers became nervous, he became enraged and decided to show Daphne how ferocious he could be. He stroked his head, telling how he went wild, and most conflicts were resolved after one word from him. In fact, Gale was covered in sweat and looked like he was sick. Our heroine was even scared for him. Gale thought that he tried. As the owner said, he was honest. But something told him that this was a failure. Everything was swimming before my eyes, and I was mentally replaying the phrase, "Master, I failed." Daphne watched his emotional state closely and chuckled. This is exactly the kind of person she was looking for, and she stated this directly. The girl said contentedly that everything was fine. It couldn't have been better. Even more nervous, Gale thanked her, and the soft voice of his future employer said that there were just a couple more clarifying questions, and that was it. For him, she was that same villain, Lady Peregrine. How could he not worry? Gale was the type of person who, the more worried he was, the angrier he became. So to hide his true colors, he turned his head away. He needed to relax looking at these cuties. This place was filled with novels, dolls, everything that he liked, so it seemed to him that he was in paradise. The owner tried to decorate the cafe to his taste. Gale's eyes sparkled with affection. It would be wonderful to work in such a place. At that moment, he completely forgot about his interview with Daphne, who was watching him closely. She chuckled and noted that if he was going to work for her, they would need to agree on something. Gale fidgeted and turned to Daphne. Daphne promised that no matter what he did in his free time, she would never punish him. Whether it's reading your favorite novels or playing with cute toys, Gale's heart was pounding in his temples. He even wondered if he was sleeping. And when he beamed and said that it was good, he immediately slapped himself in the face, urging himself to come to his senses. What if this was a test? After all, the man who hired him after seeing his fierce expression was sitting in front of him, and she would laugh at him if she found out that he liked such things. If he finds out about the preferences, he won't hire him. And then, how will he return to the owner? He tensed up so much that his clothes cracked and made the most ferocious face possible, declaring that he didn't understand what she was talking about. She looked at him with a soft smile. That's when a suspicion crept in. Why was she smiling all the time? Maybe she already understood everything. The girl asked to be honest with her because it seemed she understood what kind of person was in front of her. After all, he looked with such sparkling eyes at those cute little books and dolls. Looking at them, he seemed so happy. The corners of his lips lifted and his cheeks flushed. She clenched her fists as if she was very nervous, and Daphne didn't miss the cute pink handkerchief in his breast pocket. This is what she liked about him. so our heroine repeated once again that she was not going to interfere with his preferences.
She explained that she simply wants the people working in her salon to feel comfortable and have fun. In addition, she told Gail, who was silent from shock,
that the Peregrine family had many connections with publishing houses, and therefore the book he wanted could be placed in her salon.
Then Gail put on a very serious and menacing look, asking when he should start work.
Daphne said that she would contact him, and he was supposed to keep quiet about the fact that she was the owner of the salon. If anyone wants to know, but didn't finish, Gail showed what awaits him.
The girl said that she needed to go to the provinces for a month or two on business, and that she would contact him when she returned. If she leaves the city, what will happen to the medicine for the master? Before he had even crossed the threshold, Lucius asked how her interview had gone.
Gail fluttered around, declaring that the lady was a very good person and hired him. The owner asked what they were talking about since he was so beaming. Gail evasively explained that they were mainly talking about employment, conditions, and responsibilities. Lucius realized that there was clearly something else, seeing that Gail was almost dancing with happiness, but he decided that he could ask her about the details himself. It was then that Gail remembered that Lady Peregrine would be absent for a month or two. This news was a shock to Lucius, and he asked where she was going. The thought was running through his head that all this time he would not be able to see the lady. How could this be, and what should he do? He turned sharply and went to the door, asking Gail in surprise where the lady had gone. Then he started shouting, asking where the lady had gone. At this time, Daphne was knocking on the doors of pastry shops, but one of them had already closed. She needed to bring something home, so she asked two girls on the street, and they said that supposedly all the famous bakers had been summoned to the capital by an important client. Daphne was beside herself with anger. Even if a person earns a lot, how could they do such a thing? She would really like to see this person's face. So she walked and thought about what she would say when she returned. That she wandered around in search of desserts. It sounds somehow strange, although it was true. Suddenly, she heard footsteps. Someone was approaching her. The girl froze. Some man was approaching her. This familiar voice spoke breathlessly as he walked and tried to find her. As the girl approached, she saw the head of the magic tower in front of her. The man, trying to catch his breath, muttered that he was glad he wasn't late. And Daphne exclaimed. Lucius looked bad, pale. Sweat was pouring down. He started coughing, and Donna still couldn't believe it was Lucius. She didn't understand why he was looking for her so hard, because they weren't supposed to meet today. Suddenly, a thought struck her that maybe he was in such a hurry because of the pain, and she asked him if that was true. Lucius couldn't think of anything better than to agree, citing that the pain was still bearable, but he decided to find it so as not to be left without medicine. The Deuce sympathized with his poor health with pity and compassion. Daphne took out the bottle, which fortunately she had with her, and gave it to Lucius. He thanked. Seeing the blush on his snow-white face, the girl cried out, "Why is he running around with such a weak heart?" She rose on her toes and, taking a handkerchief, began to wipe his face with motherly care. Lucius heard his heartbeat racing again as Daphne suggested they rest on a bench nearby. Having carefully pulled the hood over her head, she led him to the bench. The young people sat in silence for a while, until Daphne asked how he was feeling. He thanked her for taking care of him and making him feel better. Daphne, in turn, said thank you for the representative in her salon. Here, the head of the magic tower decided to start a conversation about the subject that was tormenting him, her trip. The girl was genuinely surprised because she only made the decision today. It seemed quite logical to her that his answer was what the same candidate from him said. Lucius politely asked why she was going there. The production of magical instruments was progressing well, but if there were other problems, he could help. Our heroine thanked him, stating that she had no problems. Lucius was her companion. He had already done a lot for her, so she decided that she could tell him. Therefore, she said that she was going to get a seal from her maternal grandfather, Duke Peregrine, since the seal of the head of the family is required to officially dissolve the engagement. Lagar is also known as a resort, and she wants to check whether this city is suitable for opening a business. Lucius chuckled quietly when he heard about Lagart. Daphne hesitated for a moment to tell him about her personal reasons, but Lucius thanked her for sharing them with him. His radiant smile was proof of this, and he also supported me in completing the engagement. Daphne was very pleased that he supported someone he practically didn't know, and she once again admired him as a person. When asked if the Duke already knew about this, the girl herself did not know the exact answer. He probably didn't want to see her at all since he hadn't answered a single letter. Maybe he thinks it's just a temporary whim. But she tried to put herself in a positive frame of mind, assuming that her grandfather didn't want to think about the capital's affairs while on vacation. But she asked how she would pass the medicine to him while he was in the provinces. The man repeated the word pass, syllable by syllable, and Daphne explained that she most likely wouldn't be able to return to the capital quickly.
One of the ideas I suggested was sending it through the maid, but she stopped short, frightened by the expression on his face, thinking that he was apparently very worried that he would not receive the medicine on time. But I was very surprised when he said that there is a branch of their magic tower in Lagart, and that it can transmit through it. She was amazed how this was possible. But Lucius explained that in the branch of the magic tower, there is a portal that leads to the central tower, through which things can be quickly transferred. They often use it to exchange formulas and rare potions. Daphne nodded happily that she could send the medicine personally and not through someone else. The girl thought that the magic tower existed only in the center, but it turned out that there were branches. From her words, Lucius's eyes sparkled with a devilish light. The man assured that this was not surprising, as the branch in Lagart had opened recently. Lucius offered to take her there, but Donna assured him that she would get there on her own. She still needed to buy some things, and he was already tired. I watched as Donna walked away, her heels clicking, and in just a couple of seconds he was gone. The leader arrived right at the center of the magic tower. The destination was the Central Development Office. The employees almost screamed and rolled their eyes at the sight of their boss at such an hour. The employee ran after the gentleman, making excuses that they had not yet prepared the documents he requested. Lucius stated that there were more important things to do. He pointed his hand at the map and said that a magic tower needed to be built in Lagart. He added with a smile that the work period would be 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, Daphne and Sioka were getting ready to hit the road. On the day of departure to Lagartu, servants and accompanying crews gathered near the main entrance. Our heroine was shocked to see the scale of her collection. There were whole mountains of suitcases that did not fit even in several carriages. She didn't understand why so much she wasn't moving. Lias was in charge of everything. He looked thoughtfully at the suitcases and told his younger brother that this was no good. It would not be enough. Cian agreed with him. When her aunt supported her by saying that 2 more carts were needed, Daphne could not stand it and shouted that nothing more was needed. Then it would be easier to move the entire mansion. Daphne's eyes were on fire, and she could barely contain herself from a fit of real rage. The family froze, and Cian and Aunt Rivnal could barely hold back their tears. Now she knew the answer. Lias called everyone. To her astonished question of why and what was happening, her uncle answered in a military tone. She loves sweets, so he decided to expand the staff of pastry chefs. It seemed that after that, nothing could shake her. That time, the girl restrainedly muttered words of gratitude, but she was soon leaving for the provinces. Therefore, the incident with the kidnapping of the confectioners was resolved. She let everyone go. If she had not intervened then, the entire mansion would have been filled with confectioners. Lias replied guiltily that he could not dissuade the servants from going with her. There were so many who wanted to. Daphne looked at the people who always avoided her. Sioka and the boy next to her gestured for her to trust them as they tasted the confectionery that was also being loaded onto the carts. It seems everyone liked the desserts, and Lias explained how he could refuse people with such zeal for work. He was still worried. The girl assured him as best she could that she wouldn't get into trouble. His face was sad and expressed sorrow. Lagarde could be a place that would hurt her. He remembered that terrible day many years ago. They ran into a small church, and the news was true. His sister was dead. Daphne was a baby when her mother died. For the late Emila's father and brother, this was a terrible blow. That is why they now associated this city with grief and loss. Lias said in a low voice that Emila was buried in this place. Cian and Rivnel also grew dark from bitter memories. They said that Daphne's mother bequeathed that she be buried in Regard, where she died. The family experienced a great shock, so everyone except the Duke stopped visiting this place. But Daphne said that she wanted to go and lay flowers on the grave from each of them. She didn't want them to be sad any longer. I wished this modest gesture would ease their pain at least a little. Lias was flattered and grateful, but he understood that it would not be easy for her. Daphne thought warmly of her loved ones. What good and kind people they were. Their relationship had improved so much, it would be difficult for her to part with them. But she planned to ask in letters how they were doing. The main thing was that the main characters would not find out. Suddenly, Daphne seemed to come to her senses and ordered herself to pull herself together. She was dreaming again, just as she told herself that no matter how much she wanted to find the warmth of a family, she was not a real Daphne. The twins came running, screaming. But just as Daphne was about to board the carriage, Rivnel asked her to bless the child. Our heroine said that she didn't have divine powers. Maybe it would be better to ask a priest. But Rivnel, stroking her belly, reminded that it was Daphne who saved the child. The woman lovingly called Daphne her saint and tearfully asked for a blessing. The girl could not refuse under the influence of such arguments. Placing her hand on Rivnel's stomach, Daphne wished the baby to be born healthy
and not cause his mother any trouble. And there are also a lot of tasty things to eat when Mom stops feeling sick. Running into the carriage, the girl shouted that she would write when she got there, and the carts loaded with things set off. Julius and Hermano began to whine and couldn't hold back their tears.
Laius hugged his sons tenderly,
reassuring them that Daphne was not going far. Rivnel suddenly announced that she felt better and could eat anything. Julius and smiling, the woman said how good it was that Daphne blessed them. At this time, Daphne and Sioka were riding in the carriage, chatting and looking at the scenery. In fact, Daphne was afraid to go to Lagarda. Amila Peregrine gave birth to a child from a commoner, contrary to the Duke's decision, and she herself is an illegitimate daughter. It is unlikely that the Duke will be happy about her arrival, but our heroine told herself that there was no need to despair. She hoped that everything would go smoothly, but even if not, she would cope. That's what she thought until some girl jumped out and yelled in her face who she even was. Daphne stood there and wondered what the hell this was. A little earlier, the girl got out of the carriage, glad that they were there. She was greeted politely by the butler Halrun. The servant, in accordance with all the rules of etiquette, invited the guest to come in and sit down to rest after a long journey. The girl thanked him and apologized for arriving without warning. Apparently, although her grandfather did not answer her letters, he still warned the servants. Halrun became nervous when Daphne explained that she had sent several letters stating her arrival and the purpose of her visit. She realized that the butler was clearly surprised, although he was trying to hide it. He said that even though they were tired, the Duke would be waiting for her in his office and led her to the office. It was at that moment that a girl flew out screaming that she would bring everything, almost running into Daphne. At first, she froze with a smile on her face, but after a couple of minutes, she rudely told Daphne why she was blocking her path. Our heroine stood silently, folding her arms, trying to understand who this boar was, and she, in turn, was trying to understand who Daphne was. After which she gasped, saying that she had green eyes and pink hair. The girl bowed, apologizing for not recognizing the lady. Judging by her face, she was angry. Daphne watched the effusive apologies with suspicion. Even though Daphne had not been famous for her best side, these apologies seemed somehow feigned. But looking ahead, I forgot about this situation, trying to understand what was happening. The very presence of this man made my throat tighten. Her grandfather asked menacingly what had happened. Chedin Peregrine came over to sort things out. The girl apologized for suddenly opening the door and the lady getting scared. He said he understood and told her to go ahead. When the butler closed the door, Daphne was preparing to speak. No matter how scared she was, the main thing was that she finally met Duke Peregrine. Her grandfather turned and frowned at her. The girl curtsied, apologizing for being rude and showing up unannounced. Grandfather's gaze pierced more deeply than any lightning. Daphne froze and realized that, apparently, the Duke did not want to talk to her. He got after the— but if he still forces her to say it personally, then it is clearly in order to humiliate her, and Daphne stated the purpose of her visit. There is a dissolution of engagement, but the seal of the head of the family is required. Daphne was nervous, but decided that she would endure anything to get the divorce. Chedin thought about her words about breaking off the engagement. Our heroine didn't understand why he was reacting as if he was hearing about it for the first time. Hadn't he received the letter? But if he knew about the arrival but did not know about the purpose, then it somehow turns out illogical. Her thoughts were interrupted by the Duke, who said that they would talk about this later. Halrun was ordered to take Daphne to her room. The girl started talking about the letters, but that girl loudly interrupted her with feigned surprise, as if she didn't know she was still talking. The man sternly reprimanded Barnia, that was the girl's name, asking what kind of rudeness she was being. As usual, she apologized, reminding him that the Duke never met with guests for more than a minute. But Daphne realized that all this was not just like that. This girl pretends to be afraid of her from the very beginning, but in fact, she deliberately humiliates her. Our heroine had the instincts of an office worker from a past life. Apparently, she was provoking her to get angry. That's why Daphne smiled radiantly and said that anything can happen and there's no need to worry. Barnia looked at her with fear, but clearly did not expect such a reaction. Daphne leaned over and added that it was still rude, so she needed to be escorted to her room. The butler supported Daphne and ordered Barnia to do as the mistress ordered. The girl clearly didn't want this. She was angry, but muttered that it would be as the mistress wished. As they walked along the corridor of the estate, Barnia reported that the luggage was already in the room, and the maid who had arrived was also there. Daphne thanked her guide and asked how long she had been working there. The girl turned around and frowned, and asked why she was doing this. But as soon as the adults were gone, the girl started doing it again. But she needed a special approach. It was worth encouraging her, So Daphne decided to flatter and said that Barnia, unlike her, was so close to the Duke. It worked instantly. She blushed with pride and confirmed that no one serves the Duke as well as she does. The girl let it slip that she is always with the Duke, except when he receives guests. But when they leave, she is there again. Daphne played along, saying that Barnia occupied an important position, and the girl proudly declared that, yes, in this mansion, there was a job that was trusted only to her. So she shared that she was the Duke's right hand until they came to the room where Daphne was staying. Our heroine was angry and plopped down on the bed. They had just reached an interesting moment in the conversation, and then the room. She glanced around the room. As expected, there was not a speck of dust here, which meant they were waiting for her. Both the Duke and the butler knew of her arrival, but she was worried about why they were acting as if they were hearing about the divorce for the first time. The girl had a sudden thought. It wasn't that they hadn't been read, but that they hadn't been able to read them. It was impossible for her letters and Roderick's letters to be lost by accident. If someone had deliberately hidden them, then the behavior of the butler and her grandfather was entirely understandable. I remembered the Duke's surprise when she mentioned the termination. At this time, Barnia grinned, almost got caught, but slipped through, smirking who dared to hide the Duke's letters. Daphne was so immersed in her thoughts that she didn't hear Sioka calling her. She asked where to put the boxes and suitcases. The girl turned to the maid with a mature plan. At the word that she had a request, Sioke's eyes lit up. She was expecting a special assignment to prove her gratitude to the lady. The elder of the clan, Peregrine, was also in deep thought. This girl came with a termination agreement, asking for its stamp. He repeated the words about breaking off the engagement, as if trying to understand their meaning. Cheddin asked the butler if he thought she was lying. Halloran was silent for a moment, and then replied that this seemed to be true. The Duke seemed to think so too, but she still said that we need to look. Perhaps her insidious plan will still be revealed. The door creaked, and Barnia's head appeared in the doorway, inviting them to dinner. Chedkan asked what was wrong with the servants. The butler reported that, as always, he had sent everyone away. Barnia led the Duke, looking into his eyes and asking him to be careful. She grinned, feeling like an indispensable support for the master. Only she knew about the Duke's state of health. Although he was harsh with her, it was quite obvious that he relied on her. This girl's wish was for him to remain sick, so that she could serve him as long as possible. Barnia's late mother was Amula Peregrine's nurse. That is why, despite her origins, she was able to receive knowledge and education worthy of an aristocrat, but all she was capable of was working as a maid for wealthy commoners. They could have hid her. The girl did not understand how it could happen that she was suffering humiliation from people of the same class as her. And then one day, Count Drov came, a doctor from a large herbal plantation and a distant relative of the late Duchess Peregrine. He said that her mother had talked a lot about her, that Duke Peregrine needed a nurse, and he needed eyes and ears, and he offered to try. Barnia immediately realized that this Duke had a lot of money, and if everything worked out, she would be able to live like an aristocrat. And she gave her consent. She just needs to clarify her responsibilities. As she placed the plates in front of Chedkan, she realized that she had done the right thing by not conveying Daphne's news, as per the Count's advice. Of course it was unlikely, but she was afraid that the Duke would like this trash and take her place. But she reassured herself that he already valued her more than his own granddaughter. The girl chirped to the owner that meat is unhealthy, so she served a salad. She glanced sideways at her owner, who was apparently tired of eating only vegetables. She would have willingly ruined his health with fatty foods, but Rafdrave, his doctor, gave such an order. Then she remembered the letter that had arrived that afternoon. She asked permission to read, but at that moment the cook entered. He bowed. It just so happened that he was a little late. Barnia, red with rage, screamed that she had not ordered anything like that. Daphne appeared at the door with a smile, directly saying that it was she who ordered these dishes and was afraid that they would start without her. Barnia didn't understand what this girl was doing here. The Duke also grimaced and asked what she was doing. With an unperturbed look, our heroine replied that she was going to have dinner. She hadn't had time to eat properly on the road, and she added that she thought how pleasant it would be to share a meal with the Duke. Biting her lip, the maid began to suspect that Daphne was trying to please the Duke, but Barnia believed that no matter how hard this girl tried, the Duke would not eat with just anyone. Seeing his displeased face, she expected that he was about to kick his granddaughter out from the table, but the owner took the cutlery. He speared a cabbage leaf and began to eat. Barnia shook with anger. How could he behave like this? Daphne spoke up. Addressing her grandfather, she handed him a plate of delicious vegetable stew with potatoes, offering to try this dish, which will definitely make him feel better. At first, the Duke looked at her with surprise, and inquiringly at the same time. And then he agreed silently,
and without arguing or asking questions. Barnia thought she would choke from what she saw. Biting her lip painfully, she screamed to herself that this was impossible. The Duke ate the dish that Daphne had ordered, and out of anger, Barnia believed that he could not do this to her. There was peace at the table. Her position near the Duke eluded her. Chetan ate the new dish and seemed to like it. Barnia began to reassure herself that this was simply his whim due to a long separation. She was overcome with real horror. The Duke wouldn't always eat with this woman. She cherished the hope that such gatherings would end today. But the next day, everything repeated itself. 2 days later, too, Davna had breakfast, lunch, and dinner with her grandfather. Then the owner ordered Barnia to serve the dishes recommended by Daphne. They are easily digested. The blackened Barnia babbled that she understood. When she reached the kitchen, she gave in to a fit of rage and despair, clutching her head in her hands and howling from helplessness and fear. Why isn't this loose girl being kicked out? Why does he tolerate her? He didn't even so generously give her the seat next to him. Sioka stood around the corner and watched, carrying out Daphne's instructions. She told her mistress everything in the room, as Daphne had assumed. That girl alone in the kitchen was going crazy. Sioka also reported that among the rumors she was in disfavor because of her arrogance, behaving as if she were the mistress of the estate, so they were only happy. Sioka admired the lady, asking how she managed to make the picky Duke eat only her dishes. Daphne didn't know the secret. Perhaps this was her granddaughter's power. But our heroine replied that it was all thanks to the information that Sioka collected on the first day. The Duke eats only according to a strict diet, and has lived at this resort for a long time. Apart from Barnia and the butler, he doesn't let anyone near him, and even orders Barnia to read his personal letters. Daphne also observed all this, and realized that her grandfather's health was undermined. They talked about his health. Daphne could not give a precise answer whether the Duke was seriously ill or whether it was just natural aging. But even so, the diet was too one-sided. Solid raw vegetables. For a person with such a body type, such dishes are pure poison, so she took the risk of offering warm dishes. And fortunately, she guessed correctly. Apparently her grandfather felt better. Sioka was surprised to conclude that even the healthiest food might not be suitable. But Daphne also understood something else. Even if the Duke didn't like it, he wouldn't reject her proposal. Even if she is the one who caused his daughter Amila to die, he would never humiliate her without reason in front of the servants. The girl realized that Chedkan was an aristocrat to the core. For him, the honor and dignity of a nobleman were above all else, and Daphne felt proud of him. She activated a positive attitude. Everything went as she wanted, and that's okay. She also clarified with Sioka that it turned out that Barnia was recommended by Count Drave, and she confirmed it. Besides this, he was the Duke's personal physician. Daphne couldn't understand why he was the one. Barnia couldn't have pulled this off on her own. Most likely, he was behind her. It seems he was seduced by the money and fame of the Peregrines. She remembered this girl who, remaining unnoticed, poorly concealed her emotions. And then it dawned on Daphne that Barnia was really aiming for her place. Duke Peregrine's adopted granddaughter enjoys his favor. Our heroine was overcome with such rage. She experienced such stress when she served those dishes to her grandfather. It felt like she was interviewing the head of a large corporation. This was her first piece of luxury, and that girl dared to encroach on her place, slamming her fist on the table and telling herself that she would never give it up. Moreover, she would not tolerate deception and ridicule of the Peregrines, and the girl ordered to call the servant who came with her from the Duke's residence. Sioka was even frightened by this warlike gleam in the mistress's eyes, but Daphne reassured her that it was nothing special. At this time, Barnia was in the backyard near the rabbit enclosures. She tried frantically to understand what to do. Daphne could not just take her place. Then she won't be able to stay here. Barnia felt sorry for herself. Such a smart girl like her is forced to live like this because of one mistake of her parents. Envy moved her, because even someone as loose as Daphne Peregrine lived like an aristocrat. The girl repeated to herself that if she could handle this matter, she too would be able to live like an aristocrat. The life of a nobleman was her goal. Does it make sense for someone like her to live in such treatment? We need to somehow regain our advantage. She needed something that would attract the Duke's attention. But then she heard the maids talking about the matter entrusted to her by Madame Daphne. A nasty smile lit up Barnia's face, searching for Amila Peregrine's letter. Here's her chance. 2 weeks before, a group of employees of the Magic Tower were grumbling about why they were taking a business trip during their vacation, and in such a remote place. Why build a magic tower here? Lucius heard everything. She said that 2 weeks is not a long time. With their talents, they can build it faster. The owner's red eyes did not tolerate any objections. I had to agree that, of course, the boss is always right. Lucius looked up and said joyfully, "Finally, they are under the same sky." He thought about the one who had sunk into his heart, wanting to see her as soon as possible. Barnia searched the closet for the letter. She was told that it was definitely in this mansion, and that it had to be found at all costs. Her mother told me where Mrs. Amila kept her things during her life. When Barnia started talking about Madame Amila while walking with the Duke, his eyes were full of sadness. The Duke's most vulnerable spot is Amila. As soon as you talk about her, he immediately softens. This means that she needs to find the letter at all costs before this girl does. Daphne's voice behind her frightened her. Nervously, she asked Daphne what happened, and she, smiling sweetly, replied that nothing. Our heroine said that tomorrow she wanted to give the Duke a special gift, so she ordered Barnia to prepare a special breakfast. The maid was horrified. Had she really already found the letter? If Daphne, who looked so much like Amila, reads it, then the Duke might open up to her. And what if all her sins were revealed? The Duke will be furious and will declare that they have found the rat. She was already shaking in horror, imagining how the owner would accuse her of rummaging through his letters. Therefore, Barnia could not miss such a chance, waited until night, and left the room. Walking along the corridor, she constantly looked around to see if anyone was watching her. Having made her way into Daphne's room, she glanced at the nightstands and the table. Here it is! The letter with the seal. It was here. She took the letter and began to sneak out of the room. It was scary that Daphne was about to wake up, but she was fast asleep. Barnia breathed a sigh of relief and decided that she had woken up. She smirked, calling Daphne a fool, sleeping like a log, not suspecting that such an important thing had been stolen from under her nose. Almost leaving, she saw that there were 2 more candies on the table. I decided to grab one and ate it on the way. The girl, jubilantly and maliciously, wished Daphne to look forward to tomorrow morning. Through a magic crystal, she informed her curator that she had found a letter, and he was surprised that it existed. The Count was glad that he gave the maid this expensive magic stone for negotiations, declaring that he would come to her himself. Afterwards, he turned off, telling her to take good care of the Duke. In the morning, she obsequiously helped the Duke sit down at the table. She was so worried that she couldn't sleep a wink. She was already mentally imagining how she was accepted into the family, and was thinking that she needed to start with her hair, wondering whether she should grow her hair out and get a perm. And then she will start an affair with the most handsome aristocrat of the empire. She was distracted from her dreams by Daphne's greeting, wishing her grandfather a good morning. Looking at Daphne, I saw that she was smiling, resigned. Had she really not yet discovered the loss of the letter? Still, she finally decided that Daphne was a complete fool. The Duke noticed that she looked unwell. She replied that she had simply been playing with the rabbits last night and had not slept well. Barnia raised her eyebrows, deciding that she had been playing with rabbits in her sleep. The butler came in and reported that Count Drave, who had sent the message that morning, had arrived. The Duke's physician entered and bowed. The smile was groveling and feigned. He thanked his lordship for receiving him, despite the unexpected visit. Chedkon told him that he, as usual, did not shine with manners, and asked why he had come. He pulled out a bag, saying that he had found a rare herb in another country, but it had a very short shelf life, so he hurried to deliver it. He added that he would prepare a decoction and give it to his lordship, unctuously promising to take etiquette more seriously in the future. Then he greeted Barnia and asked how she was coping with her work. She replied that she still had a lot to learn, but she was making every effort. The Count, and smirking into her eyes, he said, she also wanted to convey something to his lordship. She took the hint and agreed. The girl handed the letter to the owner for him to look at. When she said that she found him while cleaning Mrs. Amila's room, he froze. Davna jumped up, full of unexpected surprise. An ancient letter with the seal of the Peregrines. Barnia looked at her triumphantly and mentally replied that she should have locked the door better. Now the place of the Duke's granddaughter is hers, and let Daphne go crazy with anger.